What if the lineage of Jesus of Nazareth did not conclude at the cross, but instead persisted, traversing the vast expanse of history in clandestine ways? Imagine a bloodline secretly safeguarded by monarchs, meticulously concealed by knights, and relentlessly pursued by pontiffs. Consider this. What if the Holy Grail was never an artifact, but a living, breathing lineage, one that continues to exist in our present day? You have encountered fragments of this profound narrative, hints woven into the works of Dan Brown, echoed in tales of Da Vinci, and whispered among the Knights Templar. Yet, beneath these fictionalized accounts lies a truth far more ancient and infinitely more astonishing. A royal family deliberately expunged from historical records. A profound code inscribed not with ink, but through the very essence of blood. After centuries of profound silence, this extraordinary story is beginning to reawaken. To truly comprehend it, to genuinely hear its echoes, one must pause, allowing the layers of time to recede, the myths to dissipate, and one's own breath to synchronize with the ancient rhythm of stone halls where forgotten kings once trod. This is more than a mere narrative. It is a profound revelation, stretching across empires, permeating ancient churches, and resonating from long-forgotten graves. Its genesis, like many secrets, commences with a demise. The year was 679. A palpable chill permeated the Ardennes forests. The customary birdsong had ceased, and within the deep shadows of an ancient Roman road, something sacrosanct was violently sundered. Dagobert II, the last truly sovereign monarch of the Merovingian dynasty, was reportedly murdered, allegedly under the explicit directives of the Church. Accounts differ on the method of his assassination, a spear to the eye, perhaps a knife to the throat. But chroniclers universally concur on one critical point. Dagobert represented the final impediment. With his fall, a new era of rulers emerged, ones far more amenable, more compliant, and, crucially, devoid of the so-called divine blood. For this was the audacious claim of the Merovingians, not merely to possess royalty, not merely to be divinely appointed, but to be directly descended from a sacred lineage, a bloodline extending not merely to David or Abraham, but reaching beyond, to Galilee, to a humble carpenter, and to a red-haired woman fleeing across the sea by boat, her womb carrying a profound prophecy. Such a notion may appear implausible, even outlandish, akin to speculative musings from the fringes of a conspiracy forum. However, history frequently conceals its most profound truths by disguising them as utter madness. As this narrative unfolds, you will discover that the deeper you delve, the more challenging it becomes to simply dismiss such extraordinary claims. The Merovingians held sway over vast territories, now encompassing France, Belgium, and Germany. Their monarchs were distinguished by unusual customs. They never cut their hair, professed to experience divine visions, and exercised power through a blend of mysticism rather than overt military might. They were revered as divinely chosen, even feared as semi-divine beings. Yet, with perplexing abruptness, they vanished, quietly, without bloodshed, systematically removed from authority, and eventually expunged from historical records. Their names were erased, their sepulchres concealed, and their progeny relentlessly pursued. Their place was swiftly usurped by the Carolingians, the dynasty that would later produce Charlemagne, the very dynasty favored and supported by the Church. Centuries later, fragments of the Merovingian past are slowly re-emerging. Enigmatic coded texts, clandestine societies, long-lost gospels, and names whispered with persistent reverence. Always the same haunting question lingers. Why did the Church exert such formidable effort to ensure their complete oblivion? Some contend that the Merovingians were deemed heretical. Others suggest they were too potent, too autonomous, too deeply immersed in esoteric practices. Yet, the most perilous theory of all, the one we shall now investigate, is that the Merovingians were suppressed not for their actions, but for their very essence, for who they intrinsically were, and even more chillingly, for who they might still be. For blood does not simply evaporate. It flows through the centuries, through successive generations, through the veins of individuals, and perhaps, just perhaps, through someone living among us today. Therefore, allow yourself to settle in, dim the ambient light, permit your curiosity to stretch its intellectual limbs, and let your customary doubts temporarily recede. You are about to embark upon a mystery far older than any monarchy, profounder than any dogma, and sharper than any blade ever unsheathed in its defense. Before we delve deeper into these shadows, consider subscribing to ensure you remain informed. never missing another secret that history has endeavored to consign to oblivion. Picture this vivid scene: a dense forest at dawn, a pale mist subtly rising from damp leaves, permeated by the heavy, resonant scent of pine, and an unnerving silence. The year is 679. Somewhere along the untamed expanse of the Ardennes, a hunting party proceeds with an anxious quietude. Among them rides Dagobert II, King of Austrasia, his form enveloped in a heavy cloak of regal blue. His face, though marked by experience, retains eyes that burn with an intensity unsuited to these quiet woods, a burning sense of purpose. This journey would prove to be his last. History offers scarce details concerning the moments immediately preceding his death. One account suggests he was deliberately isolated from his royal guard. Another posits betrayal by a trusted servant. Regardless, the king was murdered. What ensued was even more peculiar than the silence surrounding his demise. Chroniclers abruptly ceased their writings, not merely regarding Dagobert, but concerning the entire lineage from which he hailed. It was as if the very ink had frozen mid-air, and the royal blood silently seeped into the earth, destined to be forgotten. Dagobert II was no mere rebel or a failed monarch. On the contrary, he had only recently returned from a period of exile in Ireland, where he had enjoyed the protection of the church. He was reinstated to the throne with the explicit blessing of both bishops and nobles, indicating powerful allies. Yet, a mere few years later, he was gone, assassinated under profoundly mysterious circumstances, with virtually no recorded public outrage. This absence of reaction alone warrants deep scrutiny. Monarchs do not simply vanish without significant consequence, unless, of course, a powerful entity desired his removal, and crucially, his complete erasure from memory. Here lies a particularly intriguing aspect. Dagobert's son, Sigisbert IV, should have legitimately inherited the throne. By all credible accounts, he was alive, a legitimate heir. Yet, he never reigned. There was no coronation, no ceremonial investiture, no reported resistance. Nothing. His name simply slipped from the official annals of history, like a stone cast into an impossibly deep, dark well. Some whisper that he fled south, to the region now known as Languedoc. Others suggest he was hidden by monastic orders loyal to the Merovingian cause. A few more audacious voices, often derided, claim he was taken to a small village nestled in the Pyrenees, where he lived under an assumed identity and where his direct descendants walk even today. The entire situation undeniably suggests a meticulously executed cover-up. If you discern a subtle shiver traversing your spine, you are not alone. Dagobert II was not merely a king, he was the last of a distinct type of sovereign. His family, the Merovingians, asserted a claim more ancient than conquest or any crowned authority. They claimed divine blood. To truly grasp the immense significance of his death, one must comprehend the Merovingians' profound self-perception. Unlike most dynasties, which relied upon military might or divine right, conferred by papal endorsement, the Merovingians considered themselves inherently sacred by birth. Their characteristic long hair was never cut, believed to be a conduit of potent spiritual power. Their kings were said to be born under auspicious celestial omens, capable of healing through touch and gifted with prophetic visions. Their authority did not merely emanate from Rome, it was perceived as directly bestowed by the heavens. This was not mere political posturing. These profound beliefs were intrinsically woven into the very fabric of their rule. For many early Christians, this blurred the distinction between king and saint in deeply unsettling ways. A monarch who required no ecclesiastical legitimization was inherently dangerous, particularly one who alluded to an ancient bloodline extending not merely to King David, but further still, to Galilee, to that unassuming carpenter's son who suffered on a Roman cross, and who, just conceivably, left behind more than mere teachings. Naturally, mainstream historical academia dismisses such notions, citing the absence of academic consensus regarding Jesus having children. The canonical Gospels maintain a profound silence on the matter, and any suggestion to the contrary is swiftly labeled as speculative, if not outright heretical. Yet, despite this academic stance, fringe documents, Gnostic Gospels, and enduring oral traditions persistently challenge this narrative. The Gospel of Philip, for instance, speaks provocatively of Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene, referring to her as his companion, a term whose Greek etymology can imply a spousal bond. Interpretations, of course, diverge. Scholars vigorously debate, and absolute certainty remains elusive. Nevertheless, this provocative idea persisted, especially in pockets of Europe where Roman oversight was weaker and older traditions clung tenaciously to ancient stones. The Merovingians, governing Gaul in the post-Roman power vacuum, possessed ample opportunity to forge their unique myths. If those myths involved a sacred ancestry, one can readily perceive how the nascent church, desperately striving to assert orthodoxy and centralized control, might view them as an existential threat. Herein lies the true tension. If Dagobert II's demise was predicated upon his beliefs, or more disturbingly, upon his very blood, then his assassination transcends a purely political act. It becomes a theological crime, perpetrated not merely to seize a throne, but to systematically suppress a profound legacy. One of the most peculiar corroborating details for this perspective emerges not from an ancient scroll, but from a 20th century document known as the Dossier Secret de Henri Lobineau, quietly filed within the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. This modern text controversially asserts that Dagobert's lineage continued in profound secrecy, protected by a clandestine society known as the Priory of Sion. According to this dossier, Sigisbert IV, Dagobert's son, survived the assassination attempt and subsequently founded a new dynasty in the south, one that never overtly claimed its royal prerogatives, but meticulously maintained its sacred bloodline. The document itself is highly contentious, with many believing it to be a sophisticated hoax, a mid-century fabrication. However, its inclusion of obscure medieval details, such as the precise layout of certain tombs and intricate heraldic lineages, has confounded even its most ardent critics. And, more intriguingly, the dossier surfaced long before the Da Vinci Code popularized these very concepts. In essence, this extraordinary story was being whispered long before the pursuit of holy grails through ancient cathedrals became a mainstream fascination. This inevitably raises a question that continues to hover unanswered above the very forest floor where Dagobert fell. If there was truly nothing to conceal, why was such immense effort expended to erase him? Not merely politically, but spiritually, symbolically, and genealogically. The pervasive silence surrounding Dagobert's end does not feel like a mere historical footnote. It resonates as a redacted paragraph, a deliberate void where something profoundly sacred or inherently dangerous once stood. And that silence, undeniably, possesses echoes. You stand now within a deeply shadowed hall of memory, a place permeated by the faint scent of ancient incense and cold iron, where the light is perpetually dimmed by something profoundly archaic. The floor beneath you is hewn from rough stone, and the very air carries the hushed reverence characteristic of an ancient cathedral. At the distant end, a throne awaits, not ostentatiously gilded, but carved from dark, formidable wood, intricately entwined with the symbolic forms of serpents, bees, and gracefully curling vines. No crown adorns its seat, only a solitary lock of long, golden hair. Welcome to the evocative world of the Merovingian kings, sovereigns not merely of land, but of profound legend. They were, undeniably, unlike any other dynasty. From the 5th to the 8th centuries, the Merovingian dynasty governed extensive territories across what we now recognize as France and Western Europe. They were known as the Rex Crinitus, the long-haired kings, a designation that was far more than a mere fashionable descriptor. It was a profound spiritual law. A Merovingian ruler was never to cut his hair, as it was believed to house their sacred power, their divine sanction. To shear a Merovingian's hair was to strip him of his inherent right to rule. A shorn head was no longer deemed holy, but rather an act of political heresy, akin to forcibly extracting the very soul of the state with common scissors. This was not a superstition born of vanity. The tradition likely emerged from deep pre-Christian roots, a synthesis of Druidic and pagan beliefs, intricately interwoven with nascent Christian mythology. In many respects, the Merovingians functioned as syncretic rulers, adeptly fusing the ancient gods with the burgeoning new gospel. Their kings were reputedly endowed with prophetic dreams, anointed destinies, and a healing touch, echoes of both Celtic seers and revered biblical figures. Their subjects did not merely fear them, they deeply venerated them. One of their earliest monarchs, Clovis III, provides a pivotal insight. In 496 AD, he converted to Christianity, specifically Roman Christianity, and was baptized in Rheims, allegedly accompanied by the miraculous descent of a dove bearing a vial of holy oil from heaven itself. While undeniably dramatic, This event marked a subtle yet significant submission, a deliberate shifting of loyalties from the ancient gods of Gaul to the ascendant power of the Latin Church. Yet, even beneath this Christian veneer, profound and peculiar undercurrents persisted. Clovis's lineage, according to later legends, was not entirely of this earthly realm. His purported ancestor, Merovingian, the dynasty's namesake, was said to have been born from a mysterious sea creature, perhaps a kinotaur, a bull-headed sea beast, or something akin to Neptune. Again, such a claim sounds utterly absurd, but one must remember that ancient symbolism often enveloped deeper truths within mythological skins. Merovingian's oceanic origin might well have signified an otherworldly bloodline, something ancient, inherently pure, and deliberately set apart from ordinary mortal lines. It is this unique blend, half myth, half recorded history, that endowed the Merovingians with their profound power. They did not solely rely on armies or taxation. Their rule was deeply mystical, bound to the land and its people through something far more profound than mere politics. Their kings were not merely administrators. They were potent symbols, living relics, which renders their eventual erasure even more profoundly suspicious. For here is a peculiar historical fact. By the time Dagobert II met his demise, the Merovingian line had largely forfeited most of its overt political power. In name, they remained kings. In reality, the kingdom was managed by the mayors of the palace, chief officials who controlled administration, finances, and military forces. These mayors were the true power brokers, the smiling bureaucrats operating from behind the royal curtain. And, most notably, this line of mayors included one Pepin of Herstal, whose descendant Pepin the Short would eventually seize the crown and establish the Carolingian dynasty. This transition was not a violent coup. It was a slow, insidious fade, a bureaucratic whisper. The Merovingians were progressively rendered symbolic. When their perceived usefulness ultimately expired, they were quietly relegated to monasteries, their sacred hair shorn, their titles revoked, their bloodlines subtly diluted into nothing more than a forgotten branch on the royal family tree. Yet, a crucial question lingers like persistent candle smoke. Why all the elaborate ceremonial effort to disempower them without outright destruction? If the Merovingians had truly become irrelevant, why not execute them, or banish them with violent swiftness? Why sequester them away into quiet cloisters, slowly erasing their memory, while allowing the family itself, at least nominally, to persist? The answer might lie in a potent blend of fear, profound reverence, or something far stranger still. Some believe the church perceived the Merovingians not merely as obsolete rulers, but as direct rivals to Christ himself. If the Merovingians genuinely believed themselves to be descended from Jesus through Mary Magdalene and a secret child, then their claim to power would inherently threaten not only traditional kingship, but also fundamental Christian doctrine. The very foundation of Christianity hinges upon the concept of divine sacrifice, not of divine succession. A Jesus who left behind a tangible lineage is a Jesus grounded in blood, not solely in spirit. That would render the Merovingians a living heresy. And heresy, when it walks, converses, and lays claim to a throne, is immeasurably more perilous. Adding a surreal dimension to this already murky history is an obscure Merovingian practice known as divine vision. In several surviving chronicles, these kings are described as possessing the ability to perceive portents before battle, to dream of future events, or to experience periods of sacred sleep. One captivating tale recounts King Guntram, who allegedly healed a leper with a kiss and was later canonized. Another vividly describes Dagobert III, dreaming of his own assassination years before it transpired. These are not typical behaviors for earthly monarchs. These are profound prophetic motifs, biblical patterns intricately woven into medieval lives. Skeptics would understandably dismiss this as hagiography, embellishment intended to amplify fame. But what if these tales were not about exaggerating history, but about meticulously preserving coded truths? This is precisely where the modern debate profoundly fractures. Some scholars argue that the Merovingians were merely one among many dynasties, mythologized retrospectively. Others, particularly those operating outside mainstream academia, suspect a deliberate suppression orchestrated by ecclesiastical scribes to safeguard orthodoxy. Even today, this argument continues to rage, primarily in the hushed corners of esoteric conferences and the footnotes of specialized journals. Did the Merovingians genuinely believe they were direct descendants of Christ? Or did some external force desire them to believe this, to exploit them, elevate them, and ultimately erase them once their purpose had been served. Definitive proof, in the academic sense, remains elusive. Yet, compelling suggestions abound. Fragments of hair relics preserved in ancient monasteries, peculiar consistencies in legends spanning across France, suppressed gospels, shrines dedicated to Mary Magdalene, erected in locations where her presence seems historically anomalous, and perpetually the enduring symbols. The bees, the fleur-de-lis, the five-pointed stars intricately carved into stone, as if patiently awaiting an observer to finally decipher their meaning. When Dagobert II died, the silence that followed was not merely political, it was mythic. The curtain fell not just on a man, but upon an enigmatic mystery, one whose presence can still be felt if one truly endeavors to perceive it. Traverse the ancient, moss-laden woods of the Ardennes and listen to the profound hush that follows your every footstep. Somewhere within the very soil, beneath layers of forgotten kings and crypts overgrown with moss, the story continues to breathe, patiently awaiting its retelling. You now drift beneath vaulted stone, where a profound silence hums like a hymn too ancient for mere words. The Basilica of Saint-Denis, an imposing structure, looms over the outskirts of Paris like a majestic reliquary dedicated to monarchs. A unique hybrid, part grand cathedral, part sprawling memory palace. Nearly every French king finds his eternal repose here, their names meticulously etched in marble, their crowns, long since tarnished by oxidation, now resting in museum cases. Yet, beneath all this palpable pageantry and solemn ritual, a quiet whisper persists, one the conventional guides never mention. The tomb of Dagobert II is conspicuously absent, or more accurately, it is not situated where it logically should be. This fact is undeniably peculiar, is it not? This is Saint-Denis, hallowed ground, a place meticulously obsessed with preserving the remains of royalty. Clovis is interred here. So, too, are Charlemagne's heirs. But Dagobert II, the murdered king, is conspicuously absent from the official registry of saints, sovereigns, and sepulchres. And yet, whispers persist, subtle, frustratingly elusive, yet undeniably persistent. In 872, a monk named Hincmar of Rheims documented a divinely inspired vision, in which he was informed that Dagobert II was a saint, unjustly martyred, and resting beneath the church at Stenay, far to the east. This audacious claim led to the discovery of a tomb there. For a time, Dagobert was even locally venerated as a saint. His feast day was observed, pilgrims flocked to his shrine, and a chapel was erected in his honor. But then, the narrative takes a familiar turn. Silence. His veneration was subtly discouraged. The church became notably reticent on the subject. By the early 12th century, the cult of Saint Dagobert had quietly vanished, not condemned, not debunked, but simply erased. So, what precisely lies beneath Stenay? According to some accounts, bones were indeed discovered, not merely a single burial, but several, forming an entire royal configuration: a king, a woman, and a child. Their identities were never definitively confirmed, and tragically, little physical evidence remains today, thanks in part to revolutions, wars, and renovations that treated ancient tombs with casual disregard. Yet rumors stubbornly persist, not only of remains, but of accompanying objects. A sigil intricately carved in stone, a reliquary box sealed with wax, and bearing a now extinct crest. And, in one particularly strange account, a small scroll of vellum inscribed with Hebrew lettering. Naturally, none of these findings were ever publicly verified, and those who delved too deeply into their investigation, such as a certain Father Béranger Saunière, whom we shall encounter again, often found themselves discouraged, exiled, or mysteriously enriched. This brings us to an obscure detail that persistently vexes historians like a stubborn pebble within a boot. In 1653, a document surfaced in the Vatican archives known as the Chronicon Sionis. It purportedly described a hidden tomb beneath Saint-Denis. Not the grand basilica we observe today, but an older, sealed, and forgotten chamber, containing a king of divine root, silenced by Rome and watched by bees. That enigmatic phrase, watched by bees, has perplexed researchers for decades. Bees were indeed a Merovingian symbol, but how could a 17th century document reference a motif that had been culturally extinct for nearly a millennium? Some scholars cry forgery, others attribute it to mere coincidence. But a compelling few believe the chronicon to be a deliberate breadcrumb, one that points to a calculated burial beneath the very edifice where kings were meant to be celebrated, not meticulously hidden. And herein lies the profoundly uncomfortable question. If such a secret tomb genuinely exists beneath Saint-Denis, why has it not been unearthed? The French government has financed numerous restorations of the basilica. Engineers and archaeologists have meticulously mapped much of its substructure. Yet, beneath certain sealed sections of the crypt, no excavation is permitted. The official explanation cites structural integrity. Those chambers are simply deemed too unstable, too risky to disturb. But when has perceived risk ever deterred the modern world from drilling for oil, rebuilding colossal cathedrals, or meticulously repaving the past? What if, instead, something lies beneath that is intended to remain sealed? There are also curious accounts from the Napoleonic era. When Emperor Napoleon visited Saint-Denis in 1806, he reportedly requested a private viewing of the royal tombs. After an extended private contemplation, he allegedly remarked, almost casually, that some kings leave no name, only a legacy of silence. This observation, later quoted in his journals, has fueled speculation that Napoleon may have witnessed something the public did not. Some even propose that he appropriated Merovingian imagery for his own imperial regalia, specifically the bee. And here is where events take an even stranger turn. The bee, long forgotten as a royal symbol, suddenly resurfaced within Napoleon's empire, intricately embroidered onto his robes, sewn into his banners, and etched into his imperial seals. His justification was that it symbolized French industriousness. However, others believe he was subtly acknowledging a deeper lineage, a veiled declaration of himself as an heir, not merely to Rome, but to the most ancient French bloodline of all. Thus we return to Dagobert II, a king erased, a saint desanctified, a tomb ostensibly misplaced. And yet, his name stubbornly lingers in local chapels, on partially effaced documents, and in a disconcerting number of conspiracy-laden footnotes. His presence is felt not within the grand narratives of French history, but in its profound gaps, its conspicuous omissions, its lingering silences. Modern scholars remain profoundly divided. Some consider the missing tomb a mere historical anomaly, nothing more. Others suspect deliberate political sabotage. But the most intriguing theory of all is the one you are beginning to perceive, like a subtle pressure emanating from beneath the cathedral stones, that Dagobert II was interred with something that could not be exposed. A scroll, a gospel, a genealogy. Something that, if ever brought to light, would unravel the delicate tapestry of Christian legitimacy. And so, rather than obliterating him, they meticulously concealed him. But bones do not remain silent indefinitely, especially when the very land remembers. And in the village of Stine, where the wind still carries the scent of damp earth and linden blossoms, locals speak of vivid dreams, of a tall man in blue, of a queen who never utters a sound, and of a boy holding a golden orb, watching from the chapel doorway. Whether these are memories or myths hardly matters anymore. In either case, the tomb is whispering. Can you hear it? Imagine a dimly lit reading room within the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, paneled in mahogany, quiet enough to perceive the faint scratch of a fountain pen. In 1975, a researcher named Pierre Plantard entered this room and filed a peculiar collection of documents under an even more unusual title, Dossiers secrets de Henri Lobineau. In isolation, these papers appeared eccentric: genealogical charts, obscure correspondences, lists of grand masters of a purported secret society named the Priory of Sion. Yet, within their intricate calligraphy, lay the very spark that would ignite the modern Grail mythos and forever alter our perception of European history. These dossiers, archival specters planted without immediate context, made an extraordinary claim that the Merovingian bloodline had not perished, but had simply moved underground. According to these pages, Dagobert II's son, Sigisbert IV, had narrowly escaped assassination and sought refuge in the Languedoc region of southern France. From there, his descendants continued their existence in profound secrecy, protected by an ancient brotherhood sworn to preserve the sacred bloodline of Christ. A remarkably audacious claim. Yet, embedded within the flamboyant storytelling were details so precise, so obscure, that they were unsettlingly difficult to dismiss outright. Ancient family trees meticulously listed obscure nobles, their titles cross-referenced with astonishing accuracy. There were seals bearing strong resemblance to early Merovingian symbology, and even references to actual historical figures, such as Bertrand de Blanchefort, a Grand Master of the Knights Templar, whose life suddenly appeared reinterpreted through the lens of guardianship rather than mere military command. The Priory of Sion, these documents asserted, had existed since at least the 11th century, potentially even earlier, not merely as a religious society or monastic order, but as the shadowy hand guiding major European events, protectors of a bloodline so immensely powerful it threatened the very structure of church and empire. And their ultimate mission, to preserve the Grail, not the chalice, but the lineage itself, the sang real, meaning royal blood. You might sense the tightening grip of skepticism behind your eyes, and this is entirely appropriate. After all, the Priory of Sion has long been considered a historical curiosity, with remarkably scant concrete evidence. Plantard himself was later exposed for embellishment, even outright fabrication. But here is the twist. Although certain portions of the dossier were indeed fabricated, not all of it was false. Some genealogies have been independently verified. Certain tombs, referenced only within the documents, were discovered precisely where they were described. Even the list of purported Grand Masters includes names such as Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and Victor Hugo. Individuals so absurdly high profile that it either screams hoax or deliberate distraction. There is also the crucial issue of timing. The dossier emerged before the Grail phenomenon exploded into popular culture, long before Holy Blood, Holy Grail, before Dan Brown's novels, and before the whispered tours of Rosslyn Chapel. So, if this was merely a hoax, it was one of astonishing prescience. And then there is the Lobinot map, and seemingly innocuous addition to the dossier containing subtle symbols overlaid upon the region of Rennes-le-Château. These symbols later aligned, albeit loosely, with topographical anomalies that had been the subject of local legends for centuries. In one instance, a ridgeline marked with an 8-pointed star corresponded almost perfectly with the foundation of a ruined Templar outpost. Coincidence? Perhaps. Yet the pattern undeniably exists, regardless of one's belief. Historians continue to grapple with this conundrum. Some dismiss the dossier as an elaborate fantasy. Others concede that while Plantard may have embellished, he likely genuinely believed the core of what he published. He even claimed under oath in a French court to be a direct descendant of the Merovingians. That specific claim did not withstand legal scrutiny. Curiously, however, the court did not prosecute him for fraud. The matter was quietly dropped without further public inquiry. So, the question transcends whether the Priory of Sion exists. It becomes whether it ever truly needed to. Throughout history, noble families have meticulously preserved their lineages with obsessive care. Cloistered daughters, strategically arranged marriages, hidden heirs. None of these practices are novel. What is truly unusual is the immense religious significance attributed to the Merovingian bloodline. If the Church held even a faint belief in these claims, the political ramifications would have been staggering. A bloodline asserting direct descent from Jesus would irrevocably undermine centuries of papal authority. The Church's established hierarchy would no longer be the sole mediator between God and humanity, because the mediator would be a living, breathing, ruling individual. This may explain why, in certain Vatican records, there are cryptic notations concerning potential heretical lines. Most are vague, dismissive, but some curiously redacted entries reference unnamed French families and unusual patterns of inheritance. The dossier also alludes to something chilling: a hidden vault somewhere beneath the Pyrenees, purportedly containing the complete Merovingian genealogy, along with sacred artifacts, perhaps even the remains of Mary Magdalene herself. Again, no definitive proof, merely a profoundly compelling idea. But this idea has been sufficient to ignite generations of treasure hunters, scholars, and secret societies into quiet, relentless obsession. And this leads us to an uncomfortable observation. Whether or not the Priory of Sion exists as an organized entity, the impact of its idea has been monumental. Since the release of the dossiers, there has been a measurable increase in encrypted texts, fringe archaeological digs, and seemingly accidental discoveries that, in some inexplicable way, connect back to this extraordinary narrative. A mosaic unearthed in a ruined church depicting a red-haired woman holding a chalice. A forgotten painting of a king in blue robes watched over by bees. A gravestone silently discovered bearing no name, only a Latin phrase, sanguis non moritur. Blood does not die. Is all of this mere coincidence? a pattern born from the human mind's innate desire to connect disparate dots where none truly exist? Or is it something far more deliberate, like persistent echoes of a truth that stubbornly refuses to remain buried? Even among skeptics, there is a reluctant acknowledgement. The idea of the Priory of Sion possesses substance. It exhibits structure, language, and just enough historical grounding to render it perilous, which is precisely what makes it so remarkably effective. Thus, perhaps the dossiers were never intended to definitively prove the existence of a secret society. Perhaps they functioned as a smoke signal, an invitation to re-examine the fissures in cathedral walls, the conspicuous absences in royal registers, the names spoken in dreams but conspicuously absent from official records. After all, genuine secrets rarely shout. They whisper, sometimes in ancient parchment, sometimes through missing tombs, and sometimes, most unsettlingly, in plain sight. Picture a formidable, weathered fortress at dawn, its turrets enveloped in a shroud of morning mist. Beneath its ancient stone vaults, a contingent of knights kneels in profound silence, their pristine white mantles conspicuously marked by a vibrant red cross. Their swords lie reverently upon the altar, akin to sacred relics. This is not merely a military order, it is a ritual in motion, an intricate mystery encoded in unwavering obedience. And at its very core, if these enduring stories are to be credited, lies a secret far older than any sword, more potent than any oath, the sacred bloodline they may have sworn to protect. The Knights Templar, those formidable warrior monks of the Holy Land, sworn defenders of pilgrims, and arguably the founders of Europe's first international banking network, have long occupied a central position in religious fascination. Their ascent was nothing short of meteoric. From humble origins in 1119, initially as mere protectors of a solitary road in Jerusalem, they swiftly evolved into one of the most powerful forces within Christendom. Popes bestowed blessings upon them. Kings regarded them with fearful respect. Within a mere century, their order's influence spanned from Portugal to Palestine, boasting an expansive network of castles, vast agricultural holdings, powerful fleets, and vaults brimming with gold, and, more importantly, secrets. But what precisely were they guarding? The official narrative recounts their role in protecting pilgrims, engaging in crusades, and serving as the shock troops of Christian orthodoxy. However, alternative accounts, often dismissed as fringe theories, narrate a far deeper tale, a story that inextricably links the Templars not merely to Jerusalem, but to something profoundly hidden beneath it. Shortly after their formation, the Templars established their headquarters on the Temple Mount, within what had once been the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This precise location, tradition holds, was constructed atop the ruins of Solomon's Temple. While officially present to protect the sacred site, the Templars soon commenced quiet excavations, diligently digging for years. There were no grand construction projects, no recorded public purpose, simply relentless digging. And then, with equal, perplexing quietude, they ceased. What elusive treasure were they seeking? Some believe it was the Ark of the Covenant. Others suggest ancient scrolls, long-lost rituals, or sacred relics of immense power. Yet, among the most persistent theories is the audacious claim that they discovered irrefutable proof of the sacred bloodline. Not a mere metaphor, but concrete names, precise dates, intricate genealogies. A buried truth connecting Christ directly to living descendants. A truth that would place the Merovingians at the very epicenter of a spiritual revolution and position the church in an exceedingly uncomfortable predicament. Naturally, there is no definitive, hard evidence of their discovery. However, a significant shift in their behavior is undeniable. Upon their return to Europe, the Templars underwent a profound transformation. Their wealth and political influence dramatically expanded. They began constructing cathedrals and chapels, utilizing architectural forms previously unseen, designs imbued with sacred geometry and profound symbolism, circles, pentagrams, mandalas. Some even assert that the intricate layout of certain Templar sites mirrored specific star constellations or Kabbalistic patterns. Their rituals grew increasingly opaque, their hierarchical structure even more secretive. And then there is the perplexing case of their sudden downfall. By the early 1300s, the Templars had become excessively powerful. King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted to the order, abruptly turned against them. In 1307, on a fateful Friday the 13th, a date that would thereafter assume ominous connotations, they were arrested en masse, subjected to brutal torture, and coerced into confessing to heresy, the worship of strange idols, blasphemous rites, homosexuality, and rituals involving a disembodied head. Such accusations sound outrageously wild, almost too conveniently damning. Yet, under agonizing torture, many did confess to something. They spoke of knowledge too vast for men, of a truth the church feared. One even hinted at a bloodline, a line that stretches to the east and yet remains here with us. Were these merely the incoherent ravings of broken men, or fragments of a secret too ancient and dangerous to explicitly name? An obscure but well-documented fragment surfaces here, the Chinon parchment, discovered in the Vatican secret archives in 2001. It reveals that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy before their executions. Why absolve them, yet then permit their wholesale destruction? Was it an act of profound guilt or profound fear? Another peculiar detail emerges from the trial records, the repeated reference to a head, sometimes called Baphomet, sometimes the head of wisdom. Scholars endlessly debate its meaning, an idol, a preserved relic, a symbolic representation. But the most chilling theory posits that it was not merely an object, but a literal relic of the bloodline, a literal head, perhaps even the mummified remains of someone of immense significance, someone whose bloodline was too sacred to destroy and too perilous to reveal. It is here that we circle back to the Merovingians. Some versions of the legend assert that the Templars were not merely defenders of pilgrims, but meticulous guardians of a lineage, that their true mission, the profound reason for their intense secrecy and formidable power, was the protection of these descendants, those born of that ancient union between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, the sang real, the royal blood. And the name that most frequently appears in these hushed whispers is Dagobert II. A few even postulate that the Templars did not lose their power. They simply transmuted it into other groups, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, secret societies that ostensibly inherited not merely symbols, but the solemn mission to safeguard the bloodline until the world was finally prepared for its revelation. Mainstream historians, of course, push back vigorously against such claims. The evidence, they contend, is scattered, circumstantial, and speculative. Yet, the disparate pieces sometimes fit together with a precision too unsettling to dismiss out of hand. Why did the Templars so fiercely guard the Temple Mount? Why did they undertake secret excavations? Why were their rituals shrouded in such impenetrable silence? Why did so many of them willingly face death without betraying what they truly served? It may be that the Templars were more than mere protectors. They may have functioned as archivists, as midwives of history, or perhaps as usurpers. For here lies a darker, more insidious twist. Some believe the Templars did not merely guard the bloodline, they used it. That they may have appropriated its inherent power, its legitimacy, its potent symbolism for their own ends. That the true descendants were deliberately marginalized, concealed, and ultimately forgotten, while others cloaked themselves in a borrowed divinity. After all, secrecy is a double-edged sword. What is hidden can indeed be protected, but it can also be stolen. And so, the question remains, sharp as a blade in the dark. Were the Knights Templar the steadfast, loyal defenders of a sacred truth, or cunning stewards of a legacy they claimed but never truly possessed? One can almost hear the immense stone doors closing behind you, the echoing clang of steel boots, the faint rustle of a forgotten banner. And somewhere, just beneath the profound silence, the persistent heartbeat of a secret, still vigilantly guarded by men who utter no word. Close your eyes for a moment and envision an ethereal thread, delicate as silk, yet resilient as fate, stretching from the verdant hills of Galilee to the ancient forests of Gaul. It intricately winds through desolate deserts, into subterranean catacombs, through monastic cloisters, and amidst royal coronations. It passes through generations, through hushed whispers, and through devastating wars. And at every precarious point along its intricate length, an attempt is made to sever it. Yet, the thread endures, softly pulsing beneath the very skin of history. This is the purported bloodline of Jesus, transmitted not through sacred gospel, but through intricate genealogy. And if certain narratives hold true, it leads directly to Clovis, the inaugural Christian king of the Franks. Such an assertion, undeniably, represents an audacious leap, and audacious leaps demand meticulously cautious steps. Therefore, let us proceed with deliberate care. First, consider the foundational claim. that Jesus of Nazareth and Mary Magdalene were not merely close companions, but indeed husband and wife, that they bore children, and that these children, exiled or concealed after the crucifixion, eventually established roots in what is now southern France. This concept, it must be acknowledged, exists far outside the purview of mainstream Christian teaching. Yet it is not a recent invention. In fact, fragments of this narrative can be discerned in early Gnostic texts, in the enduring oral traditions of the Languedoc region, and most provocatively within the pages of the Gospel of Philip, a manuscript that refers to Mary Magdalene as Jesus's koinonos, a term far richer than the bland translation companion. In ancient Greek, koinonos carries profound undertones of partnership, deep intimacy, and even marriage. Modern scholars vigorously debate its implications. Was it metaphorical, literal, or merely a linguistic artifact? No definitive consensus exists, which, inconveniently, leaves the door ajar for further exploration. So, let us assume, for the sake of this intellectual journey, that this bloodline indeed existed. What became of it? Some believe Mary Magdalene fled after the crucifixion, taking her unborn child with her. Legends persistently recount, especially in Provence, that she arrived by boat with a small retinue, including Lazarus and Martha, eventually settling in the region of Sainte-Marie de la Mer. The area continues to venerate her. Shrines bear her name, and statues depict her with flowing red hair and a golden vessel, often mistaken for the Grail, but perhaps symbolizing something far more organic, something inherited. According to this version of history, her child or children formed the genesis of a new bloodline, meticulously protected, quietly multiplied, and eventually intermarried with local nobility. By the time the Roman Empire was fragmenting and Gaul braced for barbarian incursions, that sacred blood had purportedly found its way into the lineage of the Merovingians. Enter Clovis Thescher, a man both brutal in his conquests and brilliant in his strategy, a formidable warlord who unified the disparate Frankish tribes and converted to Christianity in a pivotal moment that would irrevocably reshape Western Europe. His baptism in 496 AD stands as one of the cornerstones of Catholic historiography. But here is where the narrative becomes truly intriguing. Unlike other monarchs of his era, Clovis was not merely converted. He was anointed with oil said to have miraculously descended from heaven, brought by a dove, and preserved within a vial known as the Sainte Ampoule. This story, both strange and dramatically resonant, profoundly distinguished Clovis. It was not merely an act of faith. It was a ritual of divine selection, a coronation marked not by human hands, but by direct divine appointment. Why him? Some whisper that Clovis was chosen not simply for his military prowess or his willingness to align with Rome, but because he carried something profound within him, something ancient, a faint echo of the sacred thread. If the Merovingians were indeed descended from the line of Jesus, then Clovis was not merely a king. He was a living bridge between the divine and the temporal, the profound merger of sword and spirit. Naturally, mainstream history records no such direct link. Clovis was born the son of Childeric the Franks, a pagan Frankish king, and Basina, a Thuringian noblewoman. Their family tree is meticulously mapped until one begins to discern subtle gaps, missing years, and vague maternal links. And then there are the symbols. Bees, intricately crafted in gold, discovered in Childeric's tomb, lying beside his remains. Over 300 of them, resting like tiny, vigilant guards around his body, each one exquisitely designed. These were not mere ornaments. They were potent messages, a profound declaration that this was no ordinary king. This was a being of eternal rule, consecrated by something holy. The bee in ancient symbology was often associated with the soul. The Egyptians believed bees conveyed messages between the mortal and divine realms. The Greeks linked bees to the oracle of Delphi, where the priestesses, the Melissae, literally embodied divine insight. That the Merovingians chose this creature as their paramount symbol powerfully suggests they perceived themselves not merely as rulers of territory, but as profound intermediaries, sacred monarchs attuned to something eternal. Napoleon would later adopt them too, deliberately seeking to connect himself not to the Carolingians, but to something far older, something with myth woven deep into its very marrow. The claim, then, is this. The bloodline stemming from Jesus and Mary Magdalene did not vanish into mere legend. It flowed into the Merovingians, commencing with Merovec, made flesh through Clovis, and continued, however quietly, through their subsequent heirs. It was protected, deliberately obscured, yet never truly extinguished. If true, this would signify that the French monarchy, at least in its nascent form, was not merely politically sanctioned, but divinely descended in a manner that no other European dynasty could legitimately claim. And that, precisely, is why this idea is so immensely perilous. For if this sacred descent is indeed real, it fundamentally challenges the authority of every church, every doctrine, and every monarchy that asserts divine right, without possessing actual divine DNA. It irrevocably shifts the conversation from salvation through faith to salvation through blood, from ecclesiastical structures to individual chromosomes. It also precipitates one of the grandest scholarly debates. Can genealogy ever definitively confirm such an audacious claim? Most historians scoff, contending that the records simply do not extend far enough back. DNA evidence, they argue, is too tenuous, too untraceable across such vast centuries. And yet, there are undeniable gaps, subtle fissures in the historical record. Families in the Languedoc region possess surprisingly ancient lineages, matching heraldic symbols and oral traditions of unusually specific origin. Some modern researchers, such as those behind the controversial Holy Blood, Holy Grail, have attempted to trace these intricate connections. They uncovered names, places, and persistent patterns, many of which thread through Dagobert II, Sigebert IV, the Plantard family, Blanchefort, Gisors, Rennes-le-Château, names that repeatedly surface like recurring musical notes in a profound fugue playing beneath the overt melody of history. Skeptics categorize this as wishful thinking, as pattern recognition run amok. But perhaps, just perhaps, it is not solely about definitive proof. Perhaps it is about continuity, about the uncanny way a story, once whispered, inexorably finds its way into bone and blood, enduring long after empires crumble and saints are ostensibly forgotten. For what would you do if you discovered your family was descended not from warlords or peasants, but from a man reputed to walk on water and the woman who stood steadfastly at the foot of the cross? Would you conceal it, protect it, perhaps even construct an entire dynasty around its secret? Or would you bury it so profoundly that even history itself would fail to unearth it? The mere utterance of the word Grail instantly conjures vivid images. A glittering chalice, a knight kneeling in profound mist, a luminous cup held aloft in a singular beam of sunlight, perhaps nestled within an Arthurian forest or poised at the edge of some enchanted chapel. It is a symbol so deeply ingrained in our collective cultural imagination that we seldom pause to question its fundamental nature. The Grail is, conventionally, understood as the cup utilized by Christ at the Last Supper, the vessel that purportedly collected his sacred blood at the crucifixion, a holy object endowed with immeasurable power. Except, what if this conventional understanding is entirely inaccurate? What if the Grail was never a cup at all? What if, instead, it was a person? The audacious reimagining of the Holy Grail as Sangreal, not Sangreal, the Holy Grail, but Sangreal, the royal blood, is far more than a mere linguistic cleverness. It represents a profound conceptual rupture, a radical redirection of centuries of established myth, shifting its central focus from a sacred relic to a tangible inheritance, from a mere vessel to a living lineage. And at the very core of this revolutionary theory lies a breathtaking claim, that the Grail represents not the cup that contained Christ's blood, but the bloodline itself, a living, hidden lineage, meticulously passed down through successive generations. Let us meticulously trace the origins of this compelling idea. The earliest Grail narratives, surprisingly, make no mention of Christ's cup. The 12th century writings of Chrétien de Troyes, generally acknowledged as the genesis of the Grail legend, describe a mysterious procession involving a golden Grail, but offer no explicit explanation of its identity. Only later, through the works of authors such as Robert de Boron and Wolfram von Eschenbach, did the cup become overtly linked to Christian relics. Even then, the precise details remain fluid and inconsistent. Sometimes it is unequivocally the cup of the Last Supper. At other times, it is said to have collected Christ's blood at the cross. Occasionally, it bestows immortality, sometimes miraculous healing, and at other times, nothing discernible at all. This inherent variability itself is profoundly suspicious. The Grail never possessed a fixed, immutable identity. It functioned as a versatile cipher, a potent symbol patiently awaiting its assigned meaning. So, why not this specific meaning? Why not a living bloodline? Proponents of the bloodline theory emphasize that the majority of Grail narratives do not center on the finding of a cup, but rather on its comprehension. Grail quests are inherently inward journeys. The knight does not simply stumble upon the object. He must actively prove himself worthy of it. Frequently, only those deemed of pure heart or noble lineage can even approach the Grail, let alone fully grasp its profound mystery. This observation has led some to propose that the Grail is less a tangible object and more an inherent truth, a hidden knowledge meticulously encoded into the very fabric of dynastic succession. And perhaps most compellingly, the earliest Grail romances were frequently composed in the very regions historically associated with Merovingian legends, southern France, Languedoc, Occitania, precisely where narratives of Mary Magdalene's exile and the survival of a sacred bloodline also took deep root. Coincidence? Perhaps. But coincidences, much like enigmatic riddles, tend to multiply when they are deliberately ignored. Now, consider this profound detail. In several early Grail texts, the revered Grail-bearer is a woman. In Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival, she is named Réponse de Joie, a name suspiciously similar to She Who Dispenses Joy. She does not brandish a sword. She does not rule a kingdom. Instead, she carries. She preserves. In a few versions, she is even depicted as pregnant, a profoundly symbolic maternal figure. Could the Grail in these narratives be a veiled code? Could the bearer of the Grail be the protector of the bloodline? A Mary Magdalene figure in elaborate literary disguise? This idea gained significant momentum in modern times, thanks in part to the controversial book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which posited that the Grail tradition functioned as a sophisticated cover story, a poetic myth constructed to preserve perilous truths. It argued that the captivating stories of Percival, Lancelot, and Galahad were symbolic echoes of an underground tradition meticulously designed to protect the line of descent from Christ. Again, traditional scholars vehemently reject this notion as speculative, yet their arguments frequently hinge upon the absence of direct proof, rather than the inherent implausibility of the claim itself. And as we have consistently observed, absence is not definitive evidence of nothing. Sometimes it serves as the most peculiar and telling evidence of all. If one delves deeper into the realm of symbolism, the conceptual shift becomes even more compelling. The cup, in alchemical and mystical traditions, consistently represents the feminine principle, the vessel, the womb. To reinterpret the Grail as Mary Magdalene, or more precisely, as the sacred womb that bore Christ's child, is not only entirely consistent with ancient symbology, but it also unlocks profound layers of coherence within the myth itself. In this transformative light, the quest for the Grail transmutes into something far more intimate, far more inherently heretical. It ceases to be a mere hunt for a tangible relic. It becomes a profound search for origin, for continuity, for the ultimate truth of inheritance. And suddenly, the Church's historically uneasy relationship with Mary Magdalene acquires far greater clarity. For centuries, Mary Magdalene was deliberately slandered, systematically rebranded as a prostitute, despite a complete lack of biblical basis for such an accusation. Her pivotal role in the resurrection narratives, her undeniable close relationship to Jesus, her profound importance among the disciples, all of it was minimized or overtly distorted. But why? Why would the early church go to such extraordinary lengths to diminish a woman so unequivocally central to Christ's ministry? Unless, of course, she represented something inherently dangerous. Not merely spiritual insight, but actual blood. Not merely profound love, but a direct lineage. The profound shift from chalice to child also fundamentally reframes the enduring myth of the lost Grail. If the Grail is a bloodline, then it cannot be definitively located within a vault, a subterranean cave, or a hidden chapel. It lives within people, within families, within generations of descendants. This inherently explains why so many Grail narratives conclude not with triumphant discovery, but with an ambiguous departure. The Grail inexplicably vanishes. It is deliberately taken away, or it is revealed only to disappear once more, as if to convey the profound message, you cannot possess it, you must be born from it. And perhaps most chillingly of all, if the Church was cognizant of this, they possessed every conceivable reason to bury it. A relic can be enshrined, a doctrine can be debated, but a bloodline, a living, breathing human being who embodies a truth that irrevocably undermines the entire theology of divine mystery, that is not a mere theological inconvenience. That is a revolution poised to erupt. So, here we stand. Centuries of myth, dozens of conflicting versions, and at the heart of it all, a cup that may not be a cup whatsoever. A grail that is not pursued through ancient forests, but meticulously traced through intricate family trees. And perhaps, just perhaps, that ethereal thread we envisioned earlier, the one stretching from Galilee to Gaul, is not mere fiction. It is, in fact, DNA. You find yourself ascending high into the foothills of the Pyrenees, where the pervasive wind carries whispers between ancient olive trees and crumbling stone. The air is redolent with the scent of sun-warmed soil and forgotten secrets. Nestled within this tranquil corner of southern France lies a village so minuscule you might easily overlook it on a map. Yet, it vigilantly guards one of the strangest and most enduring enigmas of modern European history, Rennes-le-Château, a place where the boundaries between fact and fiction defiantly refuse to be separated. And at the epicenter of this profound mystery stands a single man, Béranger Saunière, the 19th century priest who, if these narratives are to be believed, unearthed something so monumentally explosive that it directly threatened the very foundations of the church itself. He was assigned to this humble village in 1885. The chapel was dilapidated, the congregation impoverished, and the presbytery barely habitable. By all conventional logic, Saunière should have lived out his days in profound obscurity, meticulously crafting sermons and tending to a small handful of peasants. But then, an inexplicable transformation occurred. It commenced with a renovation. Saunière initiated repairs on the Church of St. Mary Magdalene. He commissioned custom statues, lavish stained glass, and a bizarre altar, oddly adorned with demonic figures, skulls, and cryptic phrases. Latin inscriptions that proclaimed, "By this sign you will conquer, and terrible is this place." Curious language indeed for a modest village chapel, would you not agree? And then the sudden, unprecedented spending began. The previously impoverished priest suddenly possessed immense funds, not a modest sum, but a staggering amount. He constructed a towering edifice, the Tour Magdala, ostensibly to house his personal library. He built a lavish estate, filling it with rare books, exquisite antiques, and a constant stream of distinguished guests, including scholars, nobles, and even alleged spies. When questioned about the provenance of this newfound wealth, he vaguely dismissed it as donations. However, local records narrate a different story. There were no substantial tithes, no generous patrons. His wealth appeared, quite literally, from nowhere. According to one version of the tale, during the renovation of the church, Saunière discovered a set of parchments concealed within a hollowed-out pillar of the altar. These parchments were said to contain enigmatic genealogies, references to a hidden bloodline, and messages encrypted with multiple layers of ciphers. Some claimed they explicitly included the name Dagobert II. Others pointed to explicit references to the Priory of Sion. Whether these documents ever genuinely existed remains a subject of intense debate. But what undeniably did exist was Saunière's sudden and inexplicable access to extraordinary resources. He made frequent journeys to Paris, where he consulted with prominent members of the occult elite. He visited the Church of Saint-Sulpice, known for its historical ties to esoteric Catholicism. He returned with rare volumes on alchemy, ancient symbols, and sacred geometry. And perhaps most remarkably, he expended vast sums of money not merely on his lavish estate, but to actively deter others. He purchased nearby land, simply to ensure no one else could excavate there. One compelling story speaks of a map, a coded diagram purportedly left behind in the margins of a book Saunière owned. It depicted the region surrounding Rennes-le-Château marked with peculiar symbols, crosses, stars, triangles. When carefully superimposed over the local geography, these marks eerily aligned with old Templar sites and megalithic structures. The implication: a hidden chamber, a profound tomb, perhaps even the final resting place of Mary Magdalene herself, or, crucially, the records irrefutably proving the survival of her descendants. Such a notion sounds utterly fantastical, yet so too does the narrative of an impoverished priest who transforms into a secret millionaire without any conventional explanation. And Saunière was far from subtle. His chapel became a surreal amalgamation of profound piety and pervasive paranoia. The Stations of the Cross he commissioned include disconcerting visual anomalies, figures staring directly at the viewer, inverted symbology, and secret hand signs. Some believe the very layout of the church itself encodes a message, a map, a warning, a complex riddle crafted in marble and wood, intended for eyes specifically trained to decipher meaning between the lines. And then, just as abruptly as it began, his immense fortune ceased. The church initiated a meticulous investigation into his finances, threatening excommunication. But Saunier steadfastly refused to reveal the true source of his wealth. He claimed it originated from masses he performed on behalf of the deceased, thousands of them, in fact, often purportedly conducted in a single day, a bureaucratic impossibility. Yet, this was the sole excuse he ever offered. In his final years, Saunier became intensely reclusive. He refused the sacraments. He hoarded letters and notebooks. And when he suffered a stroke in 1917, his confession was heard by a priest, who reportedly emerged visibly shaken, allegedly refusing to grant Saunier absolution. What, one profoundly wonders, did he hear? Upon his death, his loyal servant and close companion, Marie Denarnaud, inherited everything. She vehemently refused all offers to purchase the estate. Some suggest she was patiently awaiting the opportune buyer. Others believe she had sworn a solemn vow to protect an immense secret. On her deathbed, she reportedly whispered, "The secret is so vast, people would never believe it." This brings us to the profound obscurity that continues to haunt Rennes-le-Château. Was Saunier merely a clever fraud, an ingenious forger who exploited the church and invented a mystique to mask his illicit schemes? Or did he genuinely uncover something momentous, something profoundly buried beneath the church, beneath the altar, beneath centuries of profound silence? And if so, what exactly was it? A treasure, a sacred scroll, a genealogy, a corporeal remains? Skeptics dismiss the entire narrative as mere myth-making. They point to the conspicuous lack of hard evidence, the absence of surviving documents, and the embellishments of 20th century authors. Yet, curiously, the church has never fully elucidated its own response to Saunier. Why were his alleged crimes never formally prosecuted? Why, after his death, did several ecclesiastical authorities quietly visit the secluded village? Why was the church so eager to definitively close the file? Perhaps because the secret was not his to reveal, or perhaps because he never revealed it at all. Maybe it still lies there, beneath the ancient stones, patiently waiting. Perhaps that is why people continue to flock here, artists, scholars, pilgrims, not solely for the scenic vistas, nor for the quaint chapel, but for the profound feeling, that subtle, quiet nudge behind your ribs when you step into the nave, that pervasive sense that the very air is holding its breath, that the ancient walls are privy to something extraordinary, that the Grail was never truly distant, that it was never a mere cup. It was a name. Now we step into quieter corridors, places where words evanesce and silence itself is intricately scripted. Envision the Vatican, not as a magnificent cathedral, but as an immense labyrinth of filing rooms, meticulously sealed drawers, and keys known only to a select few. Beneath its polished floors and sanctified halls lies one of the most secure archives on Earth. Millions of documents spanning over a millennium. Most are mundane. Some are heretical. And a precious few, just a handful, are not even cataloged. This is where the bloodline narrative begins to recede from public record, not through the violence of fire, but through the insidious process of deliberate forgetfulness, not through overt scandal, but through systematic erasure. You see, the church possesses an unparalleled expertise in managing memory. It does not always outright destroy ideas. It meticulously buries them, subtly redirects attention, and skillfully reframes narratives. And the Merovingians, with their inconvenient divine claims and their perilous proximity to Gnostic theology, presented an ideal target. Let us briefly rewind. The Merovingians were once regarded as divinely chosen, not merely by their subjects, but by elements within the church itself. Bishops anointed them, and saints praised them. Yet, by the time of Pepin the Short's ascent in 751, that relationship had profoundly soured. The Pope, facing existential threats from the Lombards and in dire need of a formidable ally, granted Pepin the crown of the Franks, officially terminating Merovingian rule and inaugurating the Carolingian dynasty. But curiously, this monumental transition occurred without war, without rebellion. The Merovingians were quietly marginalized, as if their entire lineage had fulfilled its preordained purpose and was no longer deemed necessary. This stark quietude should undoubtedly raise questions. A ruling dynasty does not simply vanish from history without resistance, unless the act of erasure was mutually beneficial or meticulously orchestrated. Some scholars suggest the Church forged a profound bargain, the removal of the Merovingian bloodline in exchange for Carolingian compliance. And the primary act of compliance? The systematic erasure of all references to the Merovingians' divine lineage. Their mysticism was redefined as paganism, their sacred rituals rebranded as mere superstitions, their symbols dismissed as meaningless ornaments, and, most devastatingly, they were simply ceased to be spoken of entirely. This brings us to one very well-established fact. After the Carolingian ascendancy, Church-approved chronicles largely ceased mentioning the Merovingians altogether. There was no formal condemnation, no theological debate, just a profound, pervasive absence, as though history had quietly inhaled and chosen never to exhale again. Then emerges an obscure detail, rarely discussed, barely acknowledged. In 1244, during the Albigensian Crusade, a collection of heretical documents was allegedly seized from the Cathars at Montségur. These texts, believed to have been meticulously hidden in the Pyrenees for centuries, reportedly included genealogical charts, apocryphal gospels, and something cryptically referred to as Linea Sacra Regalis, the sacred royal line. The documents were purportedly transported to the Vatican, where they promptly vanished. There was no inventory, no published reference, nothing. But here is where the narrative becomes even stranger. In the 17th century, the Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher, renowned for his profound work on ancient texts and secret alphabets, made a brief, puzzling note in one of his letters. He described a forbidden manuscript in the Vatican's possession, sealed within a copper box, inscribed in a complex mix of Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. He referred to it not by title, but as sanguine veritatis, the blood of truth. He explicitly stated it undermines the foundations of dogma with lineage and names too ancient to refute. He never mentioned it again. Most interpret this as metaphor, for Kircher was known for his poetic exaggerations. But if it was real, if such a document genuinely existed, it could logically explain the Vatican's obsessive control over access to certain archives. Only a handful of individuals are granted access to the Vatican's secret archives each year. Even then, they must know precisely what they are seeking. One cannot simply browse. There is no casual discovery, no shelf explicitly labeled Secret Bloodlines Aisle 12. It is a system meticulously designed to prevent unexpected revelations, to protect the past from the present. This leads us to the ongoing scholarly debate. Is the Vatican actively concealing evidence of the Merovingian bloodline? Many mainstream historians would scoff, asserting that the archives are vast, yet meticulously maintained. And yet, we must remember this crucial fact. The Church has demonstrably redacted historical accounts before. Doctrines have been carefully shaped, Gospels excluded, saints erased. The Council of Nicaea omitted entire traditions. The Inquisition systematically burned libraries. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls were initially withheld from the public for decades, controlled by a select group of scholars, handpicked by the Church. Therefore, suppression is not merely possible, it is a well-established precedent. And what of the peculiar case of the Gospel of Mary, discovered in the 19th century? This Gnostic text, long interred in the sands of Egypt, portrays Mary Magdalene not as a mere footnote, but as a revered teacher, a confidant, perhaps even the legitimate heir to Christ's profound wisdom. Why was this gospel never incorporated into the canon? Why was it buried for such an extended period? Because it powerfully suggested continuity, legacy, and leadership that did not emanate from Peter, but directly from Magdalene. Now, connect that to the Merovingian claim, a bloodline from Mary Magdalene, protected by noble families, systematically suppressed by the Church. It begins to fit, does it not? There is one final piece. In 1957, a Vatican librarian named Father Giovanni Battista Montini gave an interview, his only recorded public statement. When questioned about the missing years of Merovingian records, he replied cryptically, "Some truths are not lost. They are withheld to protect what should never be questioned." That was his sole comment. And perhaps that is the most profoundly telling silence of all. Because erasure does not always manifest as flames. Sometimes it appears as preservation, as reverent silence, as rooms devoid of windows, as drawers lacking labels. And somewhere, perhaps within the Vatican's endless hush, sits a box, locked, untouched, waiting for no one. Allow your eyes to adjust to the soft, warm candlelight of an old studio, dust motes glinting in the sunbeams that pierce the window. The pervasive scent of linseed oil hangs heavy in the air. Canvases lean precariously against every available surface, half-finished masterpieces scattered like silent conspirators. And there, hunched over a slab of wood, his gaze a remarkable fusion of divine mischief and intense mathematical focus, sits Leonardo da Vinci, polymath, prodigious inventor, master anatomist, and if certain compelling theories are to be credited, a meticulous secret keeper of the bloodline. We have now arrived at one of the most controversial links within this intricately tangled web, the proposition that Leonardo deliberately embedded secrets concerning the Merovingian lineage and the sacred bloodline into his iconic paintings, most famously in The Last Supper. Let us begin with what is universally known. The Last Supper, painted between 1495 and 1498 in the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, depicts Jesus and his 12 apostles at the precise moment he announces that one among them will betray him. The composition is flawless, perfectly balanced, emotionally charged, yet strangely still. But it is not merely what is present that ignites suspicion, it is who. To the right of Jesus, our left, sits a youthful, delicate figure with flowing auburn hair and soft, distinctly feminine features. Traditionally, this figure is identified as John the Apostle. However, for centuries, artists and scholars alike have noted the unmistakably feminine appearance. High cheekbones, a gracefully tilted head, an absence of a beard, and a demure angle of the wrist, with hands clasped not in fear, but in serene contemplation. Could this truly be Mary Magdalene? This is a question that erupted into mainstream conversation thanks to the Da Vinci Code. However, the speculation did not originate with Dan Brown. Earlier theorists had already observed the striking feminine form, and crucially, the distinct V-shaped negative space between Jesus and this figure, which forms a precise chalice-like shape. A grail, if you will. The underlying suggestion being that Mary Magdalene is not merely present, she is central. Not merely seated beside Jesus, but an integral part of a symbolic union, equal, intimately connected, and profoundly essential. Leonardo never explicitly labeled his figures, but it is equally true that he never created anything without meticulous intent. Consider his profound obsession with symmetry, with perfect proportion, with sacred geometry. The entire painting pulsates with hidden structure. Lines converge, angles create triangles, and negative space carries as much profound weight as positive form. It is, by all accounts, a visual code. And here is where it becomes even stranger. In 2003, computer analysis of The Last Supper revealed that if one mirrors the painting, placing a reversed copy directly beside the original, a peculiar pattern emerges. Certain gestures align, gazes match, and a subtle star shape appears at the precise center. This could be coincidence, or it could be a meticulously embedded duality, male and female, reflection and origin, Christ and Magdalene. Leonardo was renowned for embedding musical scales into his paintings. He wrote in mirrored script. He utilized anatomical dissections as profound metaphors for spiritual questions. He was not merely illustrating theology, he was encrypting it. And then there is The Virgin of the Rocks, another of his undisputed masterpieces. There exist two versions of this painting, one housed in the Louvre, the other in the National Gallery in London. Both depict the Virgin Mary, the infant Jesus, the infant John the Baptist, and an angel. However, there are subtle inconsistencies. In one, Mary's hand hovers protectively over a child's head in an almost priestly gesture. In the other, her expression shifts slightly, becoming more enigmatic. In both, the rocky cave setting feels profoundly symbolic, almost womb-like, with light filtering in like a direct manifestation of divine awareness. Some interpret these two paintings as echoes of duality. Again, two versions of the same truth, one overt, one subtly obscured. And if one pursues this thread further, one discovers that many of Da Vinci's paintings contain unusual anatomical features, hidden hearts, intricate vessels, and in one instance, what appears to be the distinct outline of a fetus intricately embedded within drapery. Always symbolism, but of what profound meaning? Leonardo belonged to several clandestine circles. He was intimately associated with members of the Sforza family, renowned patrons of esoteric study. He also meticulously illustrated the Codex Atlanticus, a vast collection that included diagrams of fantastical flying machines, but also sacred maps, astrological references, and symbols directly traceable to early Templar manuscripts. This leads us to the core of the claim, that Leonardo da Vinci was not merely an unparalleled painter, but a profound custodian, not of the Church's established doctrine, but of its counter-narrative, the revolutionary idea that the Holy Grail was a living bloodline, that the Church's formidable authority had systematically suppressed the feminine aspect of the divine, that Mary Magdalene, not Peter, was the rightful heir to Christ's teachings, and that her descendants, perhaps the Merovingians, were the living Grail. This idea, naturally, infuriates traditional scholars. They meticulously point to the conspicuous lack of primary evidence, the inherent inconsistency of interpretations, and the human brain's natural tendency to impose patterns where none were explicitly intended. All are valid critiques, but consider the historical context. Leonardo painted The Last Supper. During an era when the mere suggestion of heresy meant certain death, he could not have overtly articulated these revolutionary ideas, but subtly concealing them, that is an entirely different matter. And when one recalls that his patrons were frequently political adversaries of Rome, the motivation becomes significantly clearer. Could he have indeed embedded a secret, one meticulously preserved through visual language, passed down like an intricate riddle to those with the cultivated eyes to perceive it? And if so, who was intended to decode it? This brings us to an open question that scholars continue to debate to this day. Did Da Vinci genuinely believe in the bloodline myth, or did he merely find its profound symbolism compelling? Was he transmitting a truth he had painstakingly learned, or was he meticulously shaping a narrative of his own creation? Some suggest he never made a distinction, that he perceived art, science, religion, and profound mystery as intrinsically interconnected veins within the same living body. And if truth resided anywhere, it was in intricate patterns, not in dogmatic sermons, but in the elegant precision of symmetry. What we can definitively state is this: Leonardo da Vinci left behind no known children, no personal memoir, and no overt theological treatise. What he bequeathed instead was an unparalleled body of work that defies simplistic interpretation, that glows with persistent questions. A man utterly obsessed with anatomy who meticulously painted hearts into halos. A man who profoundly understood blood, and perhaps its enduring legacy. So, the next time you gaze upon The Last Supper, allow your eyes to soften. Perceive not a cup, but a significant spatial void. Not 12 men and one Messiah, but a harmonious pair, a profound symmetry, a deeply guarded secret. And within that negative space between them, where no hand physically touches yet everything profoundly connects, you might just discern the unmistakable shape of the Grail. Imagine history not as a mere chronological sequence of events, but as an elaborate theatrical stage. Curtains gracefully ascend and descend. Costumes undergo meticulous transformation. The cast of actors fluidly rotates. Yet, behind the opulent scenes, the fundamental script is perpetually rewritten in rooms illuminated by flickering candlelight, by men whose names are rarely remembered, only their indelible decisions. And one of the most audacious rewrites in the annals of European history was the quiet, deliberate replacement of a mystical dynasty with one that was entirely manufactured. The Merovingians systematically erased, the Carolingians meticulously installed, and a sacred bloodline forcibly traded for a more obedient, more compliant brand of monarch. Let us meticulously set the scene. The year is 751 AD. The sprawling Frankish kingdom, though vast, is experiencing signs of internal fraying. The Merovingian monarch, Childeric III, nominally occupies the throne, his long hair, once the potent source of royal power, now a meaningless anachronism. True authority rests firmly with Pepin the Short, the formidable mayor of the palace, a role originally conceived to manage court affairs, but which has now accrued more actual power than the king himself. Pepin is a man of decisive action, strategic, charismatic, and, crucially, intimately connected to Rome. According to Frankish annals, Pepin dispatched envoys to Pope Zachary with an audacious question. Should the one who wields the actual power be the legitimate king? The Pope, then facing grave threats from the Lombards and in desperate need of a strong military ally, responded with a subtle but unmistakable nod. Yes, the throne should be rightfully held by the one who truly governs. The message was unequivocally clear. Consequently, Childeric III was deposed. not assassinated, not forcibly exiled, but simply relegated to a monastery. His sacred hair shorn, his power completely nullified by the combined forces of scissors and silence. And in his place, Pepin was crowned, not by local bishops, but by the Pope himself. The ceremony was a meticulously choreographed act: sacred oil, resonant chants, solemn oaths. In that pivotal moment, the Carolingian dynasty was born, and with it, a new and powerful alignment between church and crown. But here is where events become curiously deliberate. The Carolingians did not merely replace the Merovingians, they systematically rewrote them. Chronicles were meticulously redrafted. Genealogies were subjected to intense scrutiny and conveniently questioned. Merovingian kings, who had once been celebrated for miraculous deeds and profound visions, were suddenly portrayed as ineffective, indolent, or corrupt. The entire narrative shifted, as if a stagehand had pulled a lever and abruptly flipped the backdrop. There is a well-established fact buried here, one easily overlooked, precisely because it feels so utterly mundane. There was no war, no widespread civil unrest, no public outrage. A dynasty that had reigned for centuries was dissolved with barely a ripple. Such a profound quietude strongly suggests meticulous preparation, a prior agreement, or an incredibly skillful manipulation. This leads us to the obscure interpretation that the Merovingian downfall was not a natural political evolution, but a carefully orchestrated cover-up. That Pepin and the Church desired not merely a new king, but sought to systematically erase a profound threat. The Merovingians, with their audacious claims of divine blood and inherent mystical authority, were simply too unruly, too independent. They required no papal endorsement to justify their rule. Their legitimacy stemmed intrinsically from birth, from myth, from a sacred origin. And if that origin was indeed tied directly to Christ himself, the implications for the church hierarchy were utterly catastrophic. Consider this. The church's authority is fundamentally constructed upon spiritual succession. Apostles, bishops, popes, each step sanctioned by the preceding one, a sacred line of spiritual authority. But the Merovingians represented something fundamentally different, a line of inheritance, sacred by blood, not by ecclesiastical office, a direct contradiction to the very foundational bones of Catholic structure. So, the church made a profound trade, apostolic succession in exchange for genealogical silence, and the Carolingians were more than willing to comply. Pepin the Short was a pragmatic man. His illustrious son, Charlemagne, even more so. Under Charlemagne, the Carolingian court evolved into a vibrant center of Christian reform and imperial theology. The Bible was meticulously standardized. Heresies were ruthlessly rooted out, and crucially, church and state fused in a manner that elevated clerical power to unprecedented heights. But amidst these sweeping reforms came a peculiar absence, the systematic downplaying of the Merovingian past. Saints once widely celebrated abruptly fell into obscurity. Monasteries historically tied to Merovingian patronage were disbanded or rigorously restructured. Even sacred burial sites were quietly neglected. The Merovingians did not simply die out, they were deliberately archived. And yet, some subtle traces managed to slip through the meticulous censorship. In the Libri Historiae Francorum, an early 8th century chronicle, the Merovingians are described as being from ancient stock chosen by God. Later editions of the very same text, produced under Carolingian oversight, entirely omit this crucial phrasing. Likewise, the once venerated Saint Dagobert II, whose cult briefly flourished in eastern France, was quietly desanctified, not condemned, simply forgotten. This soft erasure raises a haunting question. If the Merovingians were merely weak, ineffectual kings, why go to such extraordinary lengths to utterly delete them from history? The answer may lie in a profound fear, not of political rivals, but of potent symbolism. Imagine a living descendant of Christ walking the halls of Europe, perhaps claiming no overt throne, yet still bearing that inherent right. That profound right would directly challenge every pope, every bishop, every dogma meticulously crafted over centuries. It would transmute theology into genealogy and faith into DNA, which is why some argue the Carolingian coup was not primarily about replacing a dynasty. It was about meticulously replacing a myth, the myth of sacred blood, the revolutionary idea that divine power could be inherently inherited. But myths do not perish easily. There are scattered legends, whispering that Sigisbert IV, son of Dagobert II, successfully evaded his father's assassination and fled south, living under protection in the region of Septimania, that his descendants quietly intermarried with noble families, that their blood never truly died, only diluted and went into hiding. In this version of history, the Carolingians are mere caretakers, stand-ins, and the true royal line, the line of Christ, continued in profound silence, far from thrones and papal crowns. The scholarly debate rages. Many dismiss these ideas as mere speculative fiction, but a growing minority of researchers are posing uncomfortable questions about the conspicuous gaps, the precise redactions, and the quiet transfer of power that occurred without discernible resistance. Because ultimately, it is not about whether the Carolingians were effective rulers. It is about why the Merovingians had to disappear so utterly. What were they protecting? Or, more unsettlingly, who? Because behind every profound political shift, every royal anointing, every theological decree, there is a story too perilous to tell directly, one that must be concealed not in fire, but in deliberate forgetting. And sometimes, that act of forgetting is simply too perfect. Step back for a moment and observe your surroundings. Not at grand cathedrals or ancient crypts, but at the subtle symbols that permeate your environment. On coats of arms, upon rings, within church windows, intricately woven into the folds of royal robes. We exist amidst a pervasive tapestry of signs, intricate patterns, and enduring emblems that persist long after explicit memory fades. And when it comes to the Merovingians, their most profound secret may not have been buried at all, but meticulously carved, intricately woven, and subtly etched into the very fabric of the world, in plain sight. The most iconic of these enigmatic symbols is the bee. Yes, the bee. To most, it is merely an industrious insect, harmless, honey-making, a pleasing metaphor for diligent work and societal order. But to the Merovingians, the bee held a significance far more sacred. It represented immortality, profound resurrection, and inherent divine kingship. Golden bees, meticulously crafted with extraordinary care and specific intention, were discovered in the tomb of Childeric I, father of Clovis. Over 300 of them, resting like tiny, vigilant guardians around his remains, each one exquisitely designed. These were not mere ornamental embellishments, they were powerful messages, a profound declaration that this was no ordinary king. This was a being of eternal rule, consecrated by something truly holy. In ancient symbology, the bee was frequently associated with the very essence of the soul. The Egyptians believed bees ferried messages between the mortal and divine realms. The Greeks linked bees to the Oracle of Delphi, where the priestesses, the Melissae, literally bees, channeled divine insight. That the Merovingians chose this creature as their paramount symbol strongly suggests they perceived themselves not merely as earthly rulers, but as sacred intermediaries, divine monarchs, directly attuned to something eternal. Now, meticulously trace this symbol forward. After the Carolingians systematically erased the Merovingians, the bee emblem vanished for centuries, lying dormant. But in 1804, during his coronation as emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte dramatically resurrected it. He ordered golden bees meticulously stitched into his coronation robe. His banners proudly bore them. His imperial emblems swarmed with them. He deliberately bypassed the fleur-de-lis of the French Bourbons, the traditional post-Carolingian symbol of monarchy, and reached back, consciously or not, to the older line, to the very first kings of France. Some contend Napoleon acted deliberately, perceiving himself as the rightful heir to the sacred lineage. Others believe he stumbled upon the bee in an archaeological report and simply deemed it regal. In either case, the outcome was the same. The bee returned, and with it, a subtle whisper of the profound lineage it once represented. And the bees are merely the genesis. Consider the fleur-de-lis. You are likely familiar with it. 3 petals elegantly flared, a quintessential French emblem adorning flags, shields, and royal seals. Yet, its origins are remarkably murky. Some trace it to the iris flower, others to the lotus. But there exists an alternative reading, one that links it not to a botanical specimen, but to a sacred lineage. The 3-pronged shape has been interpreted by certain esoteric historians as representing the Holy Family, father, mother, and child, a trinity of blood, a profound symbol not of mere piety, but of inherent birthright. And in some medieval depictions, the fleur-de-lis is subtly feminine. Its graceful curves mirror the female reproductive form, a veiled homage, perhaps to Mary Magdalene, to the sacred vessel, to the living grail, not as an object, but as an origin. Even Merovingian coins bore enigmatic sigils, stars with 7 points, knots without ends, inverted crosses that, in later centuries, would be tragically misinterpreted as symbols of evil. But to the Merovingians, these were sacred. The 7-pointed star, for instance, was not a sign of darkness, but of divine perfection, representing the profound union of spiritual and earthly power. A subtle declaration. We are of this world, and yet not bound by it. Churches, too, carry these subtle echoes. In certain abbeys with undeniable Merovingian roots, architectural anomalies persist. Intricately tiled floors with spiral patterns, pillars strategically placed in mathematically precise ratios, and chapels dedicated to Mary Magdalene that remarkably predate her formal veneration by centuries. And hidden within ancient frescoes and mosaics, one occasionally discovers the bee once more. Tiny, almost imperceptible, hovering near the foot of a saint, or nestled in the corner of a tapestry. Silent witnesses, coded custodians of something left unspoken. Modern heraldry and even corporate logos have, albeit controversially, been drawn into this expansive conversation. Some researchers assert that contemporary secret societies, especially those with purported roots in Templar or Masonic traditions, have consciously adopted Merovingian symbology into their crests, patterns of 3, spirals, bees. And though skeptics may dismiss this with a dismissive roll of the eyes, it is profoundly difficult to ignore the persistent recurrence of these motifs in contexts that claim no direct connection to the Merovingian dynasty, yet bear its marks like inexplicable fingerprints. And here is where the narrative becomes even more unsettling. If one begins to perceive these symbols not as mere decorative ornaments, but as a deliberate language, one will discover them far more frequently than anticipated. Not because the Merovingians haphazardly scattered them everywhere, but because their legacy was subtly absorbed, ingeniously repurposed, and echoed like a faint melody heard in the background of 100 different songs. It is always present, not overtly dominant, but persistently constant. Consider the intricate layout of certain European cities, Paris, for example. There are theories, dismissed by many but not all, that portions of the city's ancient design subtly mimic sacred geometry. Lines drawn from old Merovingian strongholds to forgotten tombs purportedly create distinct shapes: hexagons, pentacles, vesica piscis. Mere coincidence, perhaps. But then, why do these same patterns emerge in parts of Rennes-le-Château, Chartres, and even as far afield as Edinburgh? That is the open question. Are these pervasive patterns proof of a meticulously preserved code, or are they simply humanity's innate tendency to project meaning onto chaos? In either case, the symbols remain, and their sheer persistence is, in itself, a form of evidence. Because in a world where words are systematically rewritten and records carefully redacted, symbols demonstrably endure. They outlast persecution. They bypass rigid doctrine. They sit quietly within stained glass, patiently awaiting an observer, someone like you, to finally perceive them. And perhaps that is the ultimate trick of the Merovingians. They did not vanish. They adapted. Their name may have faded, their tombs concealed, their blood diluted. But their profound story survived, intricately woven into glyphs, meticulously stitched into robes, and subtly carved into archways no one thinks to question. So, the next time you encounter a bee within a crest or a fleur-de-lis above a church door, ask yourself, is it merely decoration, or is it a message? The wind gently shifts along the southern coast of France, carrying with it the evocative scent of salt and lavender. Along the rugged shoreline of the Camargue, waves softly lap against boats moored in the harbor of a small, unassuming village, Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer. It is a place of profound quietude, radiating peace. Yet, if the ancient stories are to be believed, this is hallowed ground, the precise location where a boat, miraculously without sails, rudder, or crew, once drifted ashore, bearing within it the very woman who had steadfastly stood at the foot of the cross, Mary Magdalene. In Christian canon, her narrative abruptly ceases. She is undeniably present at the crucifixion. She is the first to bear witness to the resurrection. And then, profound silence. Her name vanishes from the New Testament narrative like a breath suddenly caught in the throat. There is no mention of her subsequent travels, no record of her death, only a pervasive, inexplicable quietude. However, tradition, particularly potent here in France, whispers a dramatically different tale. For centuries, the people of Provence have maintained the belief that Mary Magdalene did not vanish. She fled. That she, along with a small, devoted group of followers, possibly including Martha, Lazarus, Maximin, and even Joseph of Arimathea, escaped persecution in the Holy Land and embarked upon a perilous journey across the sea. Their ultimate destination, the wild, untamed coast of Gaul, a place far beyond the direct reach of Rome, where memory could linger, unchallengeable. This extraordinary story has endured for over a millennium, long before the bloodline theory ignited modern conspiracy circles. Pilgrims flocked to Sainte Marie de la Mer to venerate not merely one Mary, but three: Mary Magdalene, Mary Salome, and Mary Jacobi. These three Maries, according to local legend, arrived by miraculous means and brought with them the earliest embers of Christianity to Europe. Their profound presence is honored annually in a vibrant festival that seamlessly merges Catholic reverence with something far older, almost pagan. Candles floating upon the water, chants ascending over firelit sands, and the Romani people dancing in fervent devotion to Saint Sarah, the so-called Black Madonna, said to have arrived with the trio. It is tempting to dismiss such traditions as mere folklore, but they have left tangible traces. In the nearby town of Saint-Maximin-la-Sainte-Baume, a colossal basilica houses what are believed to be the sacred bones of Mary Magdalene herself, discovered in the 13th century by monks. Her skull is meticulously encased in a golden reliquary, her long red hair still clinging to the bone. They say DNA testing has never been permitted, but the relics have been officially authenticated by the church. And if you stand within that crypt, surrounded by the profound hush of stone and centuries, you might perceive something beneath the official narrative, a subtle tension, like a truth left barely unsaid. And then there is La Sainte-Baume, the holy cave, nestled deep within the Provençal mountains, a revered pilgrimage site since at least the 5th century. It is reputedly the place where Mary Magdalene spent the final 30 years of her life in contemplative seclusion. Her tears, they say, hollowed the cave's very walls. Her fervent prayers sanctified the air. And to this very day, the cave continues to draw pilgrims who traverse the long trail through the dense forest, often barefoot, in profound reverence. Why would such potent legends endure for so long, in so many disparate forms, across so many centuries, if they possess no fundamental root? Skeptics point to the relatively late timing of these stories, suggesting they were medieval inventions, romanticized tales crafted to inspire pilgrimage and stimulate local economies. This is certainly plausible. However, certain details resist such an easy dismissal. For instance, specific Merovingian-era chapels in southern France were dedicated to Magdalene centuries before the church officially elevated her status. Frescoes dating as early as the 6th century depict her not as a penitent sinner, but as a regal figure adorned in blue, holding a vessel, often standing beside a child. Why would these depictions so profoundly predate formal doctrine by hundreds of years? And why, in these very same regions, do genealogies surface, meticulously preserved by noble families, that claim direct descent not from kings or emperors, but from her? This brings us to the controversial claim at the very heart of the bloodline theory, that Mary Magdalene arrived in France not alone, but pregnant. That the child she carried was the direct descendant of Jesus. That the family she founded seamlessly merged into the fabric of Southern nobility, quietly, reverently, and with meticulous strategic care. Over time, they evolved into formidable protectors of Gnostic traditions, vigilant keepers of sacred knowledge, and perhaps even the genetic source of the Merovingian dynasty itself. Mainstream historians balk at this, declaring there is no definitive proof, no written record. But again, the absence itself feels too meticulously neat. Why no tomb in the Holy Land? Why no mention of her ultimate fate by early church fathers, who meticulously obsessed over the lives of saints and martyrs? Why the abrupt, profound silence after the resurrection? Perhaps because her story had transmuted from scripture to profound secrecy, from gospel to blood. The Magdalene cult, as some scholars refer to it, was rigorously suppressed for centuries. By the Middle Ages, she had been systematically transformed into a repentant prostitute, a narrative completely devoid of scriptural basis, yet one that effectively served to diminish her authority and erase any claim she might hold as a spiritual equal, or, crucially, a maternal figure. And yet, even under the formidable weight of official doctrine, she endured. She became the patroness of perfume makers, of contemplatives, of the profoundly misunderstood. Her image shifted, but never truly vanished. She reappeared in paintings, frequently cloaked in vibrant red or emerald green, clutching her alabaster jar. And in more esoteric works, she was depicted with a book, a scroll, a child, symbols that powerfully suggest she carried more than mere grief. She carried inheritance. To this very day, some small secluded villages in the south of France claim Magdalene as their ancestral mother. Families transmit stories passed from grandmother to granddaughter, stories never committed to writing, stories of a red-haired woman with a gentle voice, of a boy with her distinctive eyes, of a legacy protected not with swords, but with profound silence. It is memory intricately wrapped in myth, or myth profoundly wrapped in memory. Either way, it profoundly lives. So, was Mary Magdalene merely a disciple, a saint, a symbol of profound repentance? Or was she something immeasurably more? A mother, a matriarch, a living grail? And if so, her sacred blood did not conclude in Galilee. It blossomed in the ancient hills of France, and perhaps still flows today. You are now navigating a crumbling stone corridor, torchlight flickering erratically across moss-covered walls. The air is cool, damp, and thick with the profound scent of antiquity, like earth and metal deep underground. You are beneath the Temple Mount, beneath the forgotten priory, or perhaps entirely within your own vivid imagination, depending on whom you consult. But here, within these ancient shadows, one legend has endured above all others: the Templar treasure, a hoard purportedly containing sacred relics, ancient scrolls, gold beyond any conceivable reckoning, and perhaps something far more perilous, a secret capable of irrevocably rewriting the entire narrative of Christianity itself. The concept of a lost treasure is not mere romantic fantasy. It is deeply rooted in multiple historical facts. When the Knights Templar were arrested en masse in 1307, King Philip IV of France anticipated easily seizing their immense riches. He had spies, detailed maps, and diligent accountants ready to tally the coins. But when his men raided the Paris Temple, the order's grand headquarters, they discovered virtually nothing. No gold, no scrolls, no significant relics. The vaults stood eerily empty. This profound absence ignited centuries of intense speculation. Had the Templars presciently moved their treasures in advance? Did they possess foreknowledge of the impending arrests? Or had the treasure never been stored there at all? The most persistent theory posits that the Templars had, long before, meticulously smuggled their greatest secrets, possibly from Jerusalem, perhaps from Solomon's temple itself, back to Europe. That these items were concealed within a series of subterranean locations, safeguarded by intricate layers of encoded maps, cryptic tomb engravings, and enigmatic signs decipherable only by initiates. And among these whispered relics was not merely gold. It was a gospel, a genealogy, a truth so fundamentally destabilizing that both the church and monarchy possessed every conceivable reason to ensure its perpetual burial. Let us rewind. During their tenure in Jerusalem, the Templars were not merely military escorts. They spent nearly a decade meticulously digging beneath the Temple Mount, ostensibly under the pretext of renovating their quarters. Some accounts suggest they unearthed ancient artifacts, scrolls inscribed in languages long lost to time, objects fashioned from unknown alloys, and perhaps even sacred human remains. One of the most frequently reiterated claims is that they uncovered documentation of the Holy Bloodline, intricate lineage charts, secret gospels, undeniable proof that Jesus had a wife, a child, and that this direct family line had miraculously survived. These relics were not simply religious. They were potent political weapons, evidence that could irrevocably overturn centuries of entrenched doctrine, perhaps even shift the locus of divine authority from Rome to wherever those descendants still clandestinely lived. The legend of this treasure then winds its way through France. Some believe it was transported to Rennes-le-Château, the very village where Béranger Saunière amassed his fortune after purportedly discovering coded parchments. Others believe it was moved to Gisors, where secret tunnels and hollowed trees still echo with tales of buried chests. A third theory connects it to the Château de Blanchefort, where geometric anomalies within the surrounding landscape eerily align with star constellations, suggesting a celestial map, a coded burial site. But wherever it was taken, one fact remains undeniably certain. It was never definitively found, or perhaps never permitted to be found. What if the treasure was more conceptual than material? What if the gold was symbolic, a profound metaphor for sacred knowledge? If that knowledge involved the Merovingian bloodline, descendants of Christ himself, then the implications would utterly dwarf any material gain. Now, let us address a curious obscurity. In 1952, a document known as the Parchment of Blanchefort was purportedly discovered, allegedly referencing the treasure of the Templars hidden beneath a Mount of Peace or Mun. Embedded within the Latin text were peculiar phrases and codes, acrostics, reversed letters, and numbers that matched no known system. One phrase resonated powerfully: "The guardian will sleep no more." Who or what was this guardian? Some interpreted it as a living descendant. Others saw it as a metaphor for a revived secret society, perhaps the Priory of Sion, charged with keeping the bloodline safe. Another fascinating clue lies in the tale of Arnaldus de Villanova, a 14th century alchemist and scholar with rumored ties to the Templars. In one cryptic letter, he references a vessel made not of clay or gold, but of lineage, sealed for 13 generations. Whether literal or poetic, the timing aligns oddly with the dispersal of Merovingian descendants across noble families. 13 generations from Dagobert II would place us in the late Middle Ages, precisely around the time these rumors began to surface. Coincidence or prophecy? Now, shift our focus to Portugal, where the Templars, after their precipitous fall in France, were quietly reborn as the Order of Christ. Same symbols, same hierarchical structure, merely a different name. Under this new banner, they constructed monasteries filled with esoteric iconography, crosses with rounded arms, octagonal towers, intricate carvings of bees, lilies, and spirals. In Tomar, the order's headquarters, the church rotunda is specifically shaped like Solomon's temple itself. Some believe it served as a holding site, not for material treasure, but for profound knowledge. And then there is Scotland. According to one compelling narrative, Templar ships sailed north from La Rochelle, skillfully escaping Philip's wrath. They purportedly landed in Argyll, found refuge among sympathetic clans, and brought with them more than mere men. They carried something sacred. Rosslyn Chapel, constructed generations later, is replete with bizarre carvings. Plants from the Americas long before Columbus, angels playing bagpipes, and, indeed, bees. And beneath the chapel, sealed vaults that no one is officially permitted to excavate. The scholarly debate surrounding the Templar treasure remains fiercely contested. Some argue it is pure myth, story layered upon story, until fantasy wholly overtook fact. But others point to the uncanny consistency of the legends, the recurring symbols, and the eerie alignment of architecture and astronomy across continents. If it is indeed a myth, it is an incredibly coordinated one. So, what ultimately became of this treasure? Perhaps it was buried. Perhaps it was meticulously divided. Or perhaps, and this may be the most plausible theory, it was never intended to be found, only to be remembered. Its profound power lies not in ownership, but in belief, in the persistent possibility that somewhere the truth patiently waits, not in gleaming gold, but in vital blood. That the Grail was not a material object, but a living legacy. And that legacy, meticulously protected by the Templars, may have been the very reason for their catastrophic destruction. Because truth, when it falls into the wrong hands, can be far more dangerous than any sword. Now we descend into fire, not the gentle flicker of candlelight or the soft glow of hidden truth, but the roaring, flesh-scorching kind. The kind that obliterates cities, silences centuries, and reduces heretics to ash. Welcome to the Albigensian Crusade, a war waged not against a kingdom or a specific race, but against an idea, a doctrine, a persistent rumor of knowledge that defiantly refused to bow. And deep beneath the rhetoric of purity and religious reform lay the chilling possibility of something even more dangerous, a sacred bloodline. The Cathars, those so-called heretics of southern France, were not merely spiritual dissidents. They represented a profound problem, an existential threat to doctrine, to hierarchy, and perhaps to the carefully guarded story of Christ. Let us commence with what is definitively known. The Cathars flourished in the Languedoc region during the 12th and early 13th centuries. They adhered to a dualistic belief system, envisioning a cosmos irrevocably split between a benevolent spiritual god and a malevolent material creator. In their profound theology, the physical world was considered a prison, and salvation meant escaping its confines. They vehemently rejected the Church's sacraments. They possessed no priests, no grand cathedrals. Their perfects, men and women, lived lives of extreme purity and profound humility. To many, they appeared more genuinely Christian than the Roman Catholics themselves. But there was something else. Whispers, persistent suggestions that the Cathars possessed secret knowledge, that they meticulously guarded a profound treasure, that they honored Mary Magdalene not merely as a saint, but as a venerable mother, that they venerated not the cross, but the very blood, that their consolamentum, a rite of spiritual liberation, was modeled not on the sacraments of Rome, but on something far older, more intimate. Some believe the Cathars were the direct inheritors of Gnostic traditions, clandestinely smuggled into Europe after the fall of the Temple in Jerusalem. Others claim they possessed ancient texts, scrolls passed down from early Christians, possibly even from direct followers of Magdalene herself. They embraced reincarnation. They denied the material resurrection of Christ. But most dangerously of all, they may have believed that Christ's true message had been deliberately distorted, that his legacy lived on, not in Rome, but in his very blood. And then, with shocking abruptness, the Church declared war. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade. It was unlike any military campaign before it. This was not a holy war against distant Muslims. It was an internal, brutal purge. Christian against Christian, French against French. Entire towns were razed to the ground. Tens of thousands were mercilessly slaughtered. At Béziers, the papal legate Arnaud Amalric famously declared, "Kill them all. God will know his own." Over 20,000 people perished in a single day. Cathars and Catholics alike, women, children, the elderly, their only crime being their proximity to ideas the Church could not tolerate. What kind of ideas demand such a conflagration? At Montségur, the last formidable Cathar stronghold, over 200 perfects were burned alive in 1244 after a prolonged and brutal siege. But here's the part that remains profoundly curious. Just days before the fortress ultimately fell, a handful of Cathars reportedly slipped away, descending the steep cliffs under cover of night, carrying something with them. The chronicles never explicitly state what. A treasure, a gospel, a profound secret, something deemed too precious to incinerate. Some believe that treasure was knowledge, meticulously preserved records of a sacred lineage. Others contend it was the physical evidence of that lineage, scrolls, relics, perhaps even a preserved body. Whatever it was, the Church desired its absolute silence so intensely that it committed what many historians now consider an act of cultural genocide. And in the ruins that remained, the silence was almost absolute. But not quite. Legends endured in the Languedoc. Songs, symbols, cryptic carvings in stone that no one could translate. Bees etched into hidden chapels. Grail-shaped fonts in remote village churches. And the constant, persistent veneration of Mary Magdalene, long before she was cautiously embraced by the Catholic mainstream. Here is where it becomes deeply unsettling. The regions targeted during the Albigensian Crusade overlap almost perfectly with the purported hiding places of the Merovingian descendants, Septimania, the Rizays, the foothills of the Pyrenees, the very same locations where later legends placed the escape of Sigisbert IV, the son of Dagobert II. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps the Cathars were not merely spiritual rebels, they were vigilant guardians. Consider this profound possibility. A heretical sect that explicitly rejected Rome's authority, embraced the feminine divine, and operated in the same regions where bloodline myths flourished. A sect so dangerous it had to be eradicated with fire and steel. One interpretation, controversial but compelling, is that the Cathars may have been preserving or actively protecting the secret of the bloodline, that their profound belief system was not merely theological, but profoundly genealogical, that they perceived Jesus not as a distant deity, but as the founder of a human line destined to carry his essence forward, and that Mary Magdalene was not a mere follower, but a sacred vessel. Historians continue to vigorously debate the validity of these connections. Some insist there is no definitive proof the Cathars believed anything about bloodlines. But then again, what proof would conceivably remain after such a violent purge? Their texts were systematically burned, their traditions deliberately obliterated. All that survived were rumors, rituals, and a profound, echoing silence. And yet, that silence hums in the abbey ruins of La Grasse, in the broken stones of Montségur, in the soft rustle of olive branches outside Rennes-le-Château. You can sense it, the persistent echo of something not quite gone. Today, pilgrims still traverse the Cathar Trail, following paths carved into mountain ridges, pausing at caves said to hold sacred bones. And though few articulate it aloud, many believe those caves conceal more than martyrdom. They hold enduring memory. So, was the Albigensian Crusade merely a reaction to doctrinal heresy? Or was it something far more? A sophisticated smokescreen, a scorched earth campaign designed to destroy the last protectors of a secret too ancient to name. A truth that inextricably linked blood to spirit, woman to Messiah, earth to the divine. If so, then the devastating flames that consumed Béziers and Montségur were not solely intended to burn bodies. They were meant to incinerate a lineage. But blood leaves indelible stains, and memory possesses deep roots. And sometimes, what fire relentlessly attempts to erase, the earth profoundly remembers. Imagine a door, several in fact, massive iron gates vigilantly guarded by imposing stone saints, silent cameras, and the careful, pervasive weight of centuries. Behind them lies what may be the most mysterious collection of documents on Earth, the Vatican Apostolic Archive. Once known as the Secret Archive, not due to its clandestine nature, but from the Latin secretum, meaning private, it nevertheless retains the aura of something meticulously, deliberately hidden. And deep within these temperature-controlled vaults, behind miles of locked glass and Latin indexes, some believe the greatest cover-up in human history remains filed neatly in profound silence. Not gold, not sacred relics, but records. If the bloodline of Christ genuinely existed, and if the Church possessed knowledge of it, then this is precisely where the irrefutable evidence would reside. To walk the hallowed halls of the Vatican Archive is to perceive the very breath of popes long departed. It is home to over 50 miles of shelving, yes, miles, containing documents that stretch back well over a millennium. From the excommunication of Martin Luther to the intricate trial records of the Knights Templar, it is all meticulously preserved there. Yet, only a select handful of scholars are granted access each year. Requests must be rigorously specific, approved well in advance, and explicitly granted by Vatican officials. You do not simply browse the shelves. You are guided, vigilantly watched, and strictly limited. What then remains perpetually unseen? The first compelling hint that the archive might contain something more profound than mere ecclesiastical bureaucracy comes from its conspicuous gaps. Scholars who have meticulously studied medieval church records have noted entire stretches of papal correspondence missing, especially during moments crucial to the Merovingian mystery. Letters from the reign of Pope Zachary, for example, inexplicably vanish around the time he sanctioned the deposition of the last Merovingian king. Why would a record of such profound magnitude be so conspicuously absent? And then there is the curious case of Pope Sylvester II, a brilliant mathematician and scholar rumored to possess forbidden knowledge. Some claimed he had traveled to Islamic Spain or even beyond, returning with arcane texts. But others whispered that he uncovered something within the early records of the Church itself, something that irrevocably reshaped his beliefs. After his death, his tomb was said to rattle violently whenever a pope of questionable virtue assumed office. Superstition, perhaps, but superstition typically coalesces around a kernel of underlying truth. In modern times, very few individuals have spoken openly about what truly lies hidden within. One notable exception is the late Jesuit priest and theologian, Father Malachi Martin, who claimed vaguely, but with persistent conviction, that the Church had long been aware of a sacred bloodline. He never provided specific names. He never offered definitive proof, but he hinted that this profound knowledge was deliberately buried for the ultimate safety of souls and the fundamental stability of the faith. It is tempting to dismiss such statements as mere speculation until one considers what the Vatican has consistently chosen not to release. For centuries, it was believed that the Church had no direct involvement in the suppression of the Merovingians, that it merely blessed the rise of the Carolingians for political stability. But scattered references in obscure medieval texts suggest otherwise. There are tantalizing hints of backroom councils, of agreements forged in private, never publicly revealed. Documents that, if uncovered, would prove explicit collusion, and perhaps even reveal why the Merovingians had to disappear so utterly. Now, Consider this. The Priory of Sion, the purported secret order charged with protecting the bloodline, is alleged by some to have had operatives within the church itself, priests, monks, scribes, men who quietly recorded, encoded, and meticulously preserved the truth even as others strove to destroy it. If such a network truly existed, the archive would represent the ultimate battlefield. Knowledge meticulously locked behind knowledge. There is also the matter of the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the church's infamous list of banned books. Some of the texts on that list were not deemed heretical for their ideas about God, but for their radical ideas about Jesus. Books that dared to suggest he married, that he fathered children, that Mary Magdalene was more than just a follower. Many of these works, rather than being simply destroyed, were systematically collected by the Vatican and sequestered. For study, for suppression, no one definitively knows. And still, the archive continues its relentless expansion. Every year, more records are meticulously added. Some assert that documents from the Templar trials, original unedited versions, are stored there. Others believe that portions of the Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly those that challenge traditional narratives, were quietly acquired and hidden away. There is even a persistent rumor, more folklore than verifiable fact, admittedly, that a locked chamber within the archive contains a complete genealogy, a hand-scribed, meticulously updated record of descent, commencing with Jesus and Mary Magdalene and culminating with someone still living today. Let us pause and profoundly contemplate that idea. It is audacious, outlandish, but imagine its implications. A single document that meticulously tracks the Holy Bloodline, century by century, child by child. If such a thing truly exists, it would be the most powerful piece of paper in human history. It would utterly dismantle the theological structure of Catholicism. It would irrevocably shift spiritual authority from abstract doctrine to tangible DNA, which might precisely explain why it must never, ever be found. Naturally, the Vatican vehemently denies everything. It insists the archive is not secret, merely private, that nothing controversial is hidden there, that claims of bloodline records, alternative gospels, or Templar secrets are pure fiction. But then, why do the denials feel so rehearsed, so meticulously delivered? Why are ancient documents guarded with such meticulous care? Why is access restricted not based on mere scholarly curiosity, but on explicit, granted permission? What if the profound truth isn't what's contained inside the archive, but the pervasive fear of what it might inspire? Faith, after all, thrives on mystery. But mysteries that suddenly transform into concrete evidence, they threaten the entire edifice. Still, the archive remains cold, quiet, vigilantly watching. And every year, a few more scholars slip behind its formidable gates, some seeking knowledge, others perhaps seeking a profound legacy, because somewhere in those endless miles of parchment and ink, the delicate line between religion and blood may be nothing more than a sealed folder, patiently awaiting its opening. Allow your gaze to drift now, far from medieval parchment and hidden vaults. Look instead toward polished thrones, sumptuously draped velvet robes, and glittering crowns. Monarchies, though they may feel like anachronistic relics of the past, stubbornly persist, some ceremonial, others still wielding formidable power. Yet, beneath the polished pageantry of modern royalty lies a profound question most would never dare to articulate aloud. Could any of today's noble houses still carry the sacred blood of Christ? This is the claim, whispered, often dismissed, and occasionally vehemently asserted, that the Merovingian line never truly died out, that it was not extinguished, but simply dissolved into other families, meticulously intermarried, subtly obscured, and carefully cultivated through successive generations, not merely preserved, but strategically placed. Let us begin with one persistent and verifiable fact. Many modern European royal families are intricately interconnected through centuries of intermarriage. Dynasties such as the Habsburgs, Bourbons, and Windsors share common ancestry stretching back hundreds, even over 1,000 years. That much is undeniable historical fact. But when you meticulously trace those tangled roots deeply enough, some genealogists claim to discover Merovingian branches still thriving, quietly entwined, and surprisingly close to the present day. Take the House of Habsburg, for example. Once rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, they extensively intermarried with French and German nobility, tracing back to the Carolingians. But the Carolingians themselves ascended to power only after replacing the Merovingians, officially extinguishing the earlier dynasty. Yet, certain noble lines connected to Merovingian rulers, especially through the female line, continued on, absorbed into other bloodlines rather than utterly erased. And this is the crucial loophole. Most royal lineages traditionally track male descent, but Merovingian blood, if it carried the sacred DNA of Christ, would most likely have survived through daughters, granddaughters, and strategic noble marriages that slipped quietly into the record books without drawing undue attention. Those women, often unnamed in official chronicles, could have seamlessly passed the bloodline forward, generation after generation, until their descendants emerged with new surnames, new titles, and ancient blood. In fact, certain family trees from southern France, nobles with undeniable ties to the regions once governed by the Merovingians, exhibit unbroken lines stretching back to the early Middle Ages. Some names recur with persistent regularity: Dagobert, Claire, Theodoric. These are not common modern names, yet they persist quietly in these genealogies. Are they mere homages or profound reminders? This brings us to the work of modern researchers, many controversial, some outright dismissed, who have attempted to map this elusive bloodline. Perhaps the most renowned example originates from the now infamous book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which posits that certain aristocratic families in southern France, particularly the Counts of Razes and the Lords of Rennes-le-Château, were direct descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene through the Merovingians. The authors connected this lineage to the modern House of Plantard, a French noble line that Pierre Plantard himself claimed was the true guardian of the bloodline. Of course, Plantard's claims were riddled with forgeries, contradictions, and deliberate myth-making, but buried beneath the embellishments may lie tantalizing fragments of truth. Multiple independent genealogical studies have indicated that many European royals today, especially through shared descent from Charlemagne, could plausibly trace their ancestry back to early Frankish kings, including, theoretically, the Merovingians. Even Queen Elizabeth II, through her descent from Alfred the Great and the House of Wessex, was claimed by some to possess bloodlines that intersected indirectly with early continental nobility. Her Germanic ties, via the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, loop back into the intricate web of old Europe's elite, where even the thinnest Merovingian tendril might still subtly linger. But here is where it becomes even more speculative and controversial. Some believe that the continued survival of monarchies, particularly constitutional ones, serves as a quiet acknowledgement of sacred legitimacy, that the pervasive symbols, bees, fleur-de-lis, and solar crosses, embedded in royal crests, jewelry, and architecture, are more than mere aesthetic choices. They are potent markers, persistent echoes of the bloodline hidden in plain sight. In Scandinavian heraldry, one can discover symbols long associated with Merovingian iconography. In Spanish royalty, the enduring veneration of relics tied to Magdalene persists, often passed off as conventional Catholic piety, but perhaps rooted in something far older. And in Belgium, a nation whose very monarchy was an invention of the 19th century, there are whispers that ancient blood still flows beneath the constitutional facade. Naturally, all of this is accompanied by a significant measure of skepticism. Most mainstream historians concur that, without irrefutable DNA evidence, such claims are impossible to definitively verify. Royal genealogy is notoriously complex, replete with apocryphal links, forged lineages, and assumptions based on strategic marriage alliances rather than precise biological descent. Add to this the chaotic fragmentation of European nobility over centuries of war, reformation, and revolution, and one is left with a genealogical forest far more tangled than readable. But the profound mystery persists because it feels inherently plausible. After all, is this not precisely how power survives? Not always through overt conquest, but through profound continuity, through names quietly carried forward, through sons deliberately named for forgotten kings, through blood that remembers what history strives to forget. And then there are the families who never overtly sought crowns, yet quietly claimed direct descent from Christ. In rural pockets of France, Switzerland, and Italy, there exist houses, stone, ivy-covered, whose owners meticulously maintain records, genealogies intricately scrolled in Latin, wrapped in ancient cloth, and stored in drawers never revealed to strangers. These individuals do not seek power, they seek preservation, as if the bloodline once scattered chose not to rule, but to patiently wait. An ongoing debate lingers among scholars and amateur sleuths alike. If the bloodline did indeed survive, what precisely does it signify? Would it confer divine authority, spiritual leadership, Or would it simply be an inconvenient fact that fundamentally challenges millennia of established dogma? There is no conclusive answer, only persistent hints. A ring passed down through generations, a family crest bearing a peculiar symbol, a name on an ancient parchment, faded yet legible, Clovis, Dagobert, Sarah. And somewhere, perhaps today, someone walks through a garden, either profoundly unaware or intimately cognizant of the immense burden carried within their veins. A lineage older than any king, heavier than any crown. The question is not whether the bloodline exists. The question is whether it still profoundly matters, or whether, in some quiet hour, in some quiet house, it is merely waiting. You find yourself beneath vaulted ceilings once more, but this time the air is redolent with the perfume of incense and old tobacco, rather than damp mildew. Velvet drapes, intricately carved oak chairs, aprons embroidered with symbols you only partially recognize. The setting is familiar, yet profoundly elusive. A Masonic lodge. And once again, the whispers return. About a bloodline, about a secret too potent for the light of day. Could the Freemasons, those enigmatic architects of modernity, truly hold the keys to the Merovingian legacy? It is easy to dismiss Masonic lore as mere theatrical pageantry. Men in sashes conducting arcane rituals with swords, candles, and cryptic phrases. But Freemasons are more than mere social clubs. Historically, they have attracted scientists, kings, artists, and revolutionaries alike. And their symbols, well, their symbols speak louder than any words. One symbol in particular resurfaces with striking regularity, the beehive. In Masonic iconography, it represents industry, profound harmony, and collective labor. But to anyone who has diligently followed the trail of the Merovingians, it signifies something entirely different. Bees were the unmistakable royal emblem of the Merovingians, discovered interred with kings, etched into ancient tombs, painted in the margins of medieval manuscripts, and briefly revived by Napoleon Bonaparte, who some believe was deliberately attempting to link himself to the bloodline through potent symbology. So, when you enter a Masonic hall and discern the beehive nestled between the all-seeing eye and the twin pillars, one cannot help but wonder, coincidence or profound continuity? The Freemasons trace their mythical origins to the very builders of Solomon's Temple, the same temple the Knights Templar meticulously excavated during their tenure in Jerusalem. In Masonic lore, Hiram Abiff, the master builder, is martyred for his sacred knowledge, an echo, some believe, of Christ himself. But what if this tale was not merely an allegory? What if it intricately encoded fragments of the bloodline narrative in metaphor and ritual, thereby ensuring its survival not through written scripture, but through living practice? Ritual, in essence, is memory adorned in costume. Now, consider this profound aspect. Masonic initiations involve symbolic death and rebirth. They feature secret passwords, clandestine handshakes, and elaborate allegories of resurrection. Some assert these rituals are not merely moral lessons, but profound reenactments of a deeper truth, a hidden lineage meticulously kept alive through performance. In this view, every initiated Mason becomes not merely a brother, but a living vessel of an ancient legacy. Many scholars point to the Scottish Rite, particularly its higher degrees, as being especially rich in esoteric symbology. The Rose Croix degree, for instance, features a ritual death at the hands of persecutors, followed by a resurrection associated not with Christ, but with a divine king. Some versions explicitly reject the Church's interpretation of the crucifixion. Could this be a coded veneration of a dramatically different story, one where the divine was not crucified alone, but continued through an enduring bloodline? Masonic texts and lectures are frequently cryptic by design, but phrases such as the lost word, the true architect, and the royal secret acquire an eerie resonance when viewed through the lens of sacred genealogy. What if the lost word is not a single name, but an entire name line? There is historical tension here too. The Catholic Church has long condemned Freemasonry as heretical, going so far as to excommunicate its members. Why such severe opposition? Some argue it is because Freemasonry champions reason, not dogma, but others contend that the true reason lies buried deeper, that the Masons preserve stories the Church painstakingly endeavored to erase, stories that threatened to shift spiritual authority away from Rome. Now, recall that many of America's founding fathers, Washington, Franklin, Hancock, were prominent Freemasons. They meticulously wove Masonic geometry into the very layout of Washington, D.C., The capital sits on a hill. The city is structured in star-shaped patterns. Obelisks rise like ancient pharaohs' needles. Owls and pentagrams nestle quietly within the architecture, and hidden among the carvings, bees. Were these symbols mere aesthetic choices or unconscious continuations of something far older? We must also consider Albert Pike, the 19th century Freemason, Confederate officer, and author of Morals and Dogma, one of the foundational texts of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Pike repeatedly refers to the ancient mysteries, secret knowledge passed down through initiatic societies. He never explicitly mentions Merovingians, but he speaks of kings born not by right, but by sacrifice, men who carried the divine within them and who were relentlessly hunted for it. Sound familiar? Then there is the legend of the 9 Unknown Men, an Indian esoteric society purportedly founded by Emperor Ashoka to protect dangerous truths. Freemasons have long debated whether they inherited fragments of these ancient guardianships, and some believe the Priory of Sion, alleged protectors of the Merovingian line, operated in parallel or even within Masonic lodges under assumed identities. The most tantalizing suggestion is that some Freemasons were never intended to lead, but to hide, to obscure the truth behind allegory until the world was finally prepared. That the twin pillars of Boaz and Jachin do not merely mark the entrance to Solomon's temple, but to a profound story no longer articulated aloud. The scholarly community remains skeptical, of course. Most Masonic historians insist the fraternity's symbols are moral metaphors, not genealogical codes, but their arguments, while logically sound, often feel incomplete. There is a perceptible hollowness in the denial that suggests something profoundly left unspoken, because here is the undeniable crux. If the Merovingian line survived, and if it was ever encoded into cultural institutions, it would not reside in history books. It would not be shouted from pulpits or proclaimed by kings. It would exist in profound silence, in lodges, in rituals no one outside fully comprehends, in whispers passed down by torchlight and shared over wine, recited in rooms redolent with dust and candle wax. So, ask yourself, when a Freemason refers to the great architect of the universe, is he speaking of God, or of a profound legacy, a structure built not from mere stone, but from an enduring bloodline? Picture this: a brittle scroll, tightly rolled and meticulously sealed in wax, discovered within a crumbling chapel nestled deep in the Pyrenean foothills. The ancient parchment crackles softly as it is unrolled. The ink, though faded, remains legible, and the markings, more symbols than conventional words, appear to form a coherent pattern: a star, a winding path, a cross, and finally, a resonant name. Now, envision that this is not an isolated discovery. Across the vast expanse of France, Italy, and even the remote Scottish Highlands, fragments of similar parchments have surfaced in private collections, dusty libraries, and long-forgotten family estates. Each, in isolation, seems inconsequential. But when viewed collectively, they subtly whisper of a map, one not drawn for conventional navigation, but for profound revelation. In the intricate context of the Merovingian code, these artifacts are not mere relics. They are explicit road signs. Let us begin with the Lobino document, an obscure map discovered in the late 20th century, allegedly part of the Dossier Secrets. Yes, those same controversial parchments deposited at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, intrinsically linking to the Priory of Sion. It depicts the region surrounding Rennes-le-Château, overlaid with peculiar lines, geometric shapes, and points marked with initials. Scholars largely dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, too convenient, too neatly connected to the already flamboyant Saunière legend. And yet, the coordinates undeniably aligned with certain ancient structures, dolmens, chapels, grottos. But more than mere landmarks, these maps seem to describe alignments, celestial paths tied to solstices, equinoxes, and specific planetary conjunctions. Some believe these are remnants of ancient Druidic knowledge, skillfully co-opted by early Christians and meticulously preserved in secrecy. Others contend they conceal burial sites, not of material treasure, but of profound truth. More curious still are the diagrams that explicitly reference a place known cryptically as l'Ombre de Dieu, the Tomb of Kings. Not the biblical site in Jerusalem, but a hidden location in southern France. Allegedly, it is where Dagobert II's body was reinterred after his assassination, far from the grand Basilica of Saint-Denis. Some claim the tomb contains not only his remains, but also scrolls detailing the secret lineage and its continued survival. Then there is the Magdalene Trail, an informal pilgrimage route that links Sainte-Marie de la Mer, where legend holds Mary Magdalene arrived by boat, with a series of chapels, caves, and mountaintops stretching deep into the Occitanian landscape. Local folklore frequently refers to the Lady in Red, a veiled woman said to have visited these sites in the 12th and 13th centuries, sometimes accompanied by a child. In nearly every account, she leaves something behind: a carved stone, a sealed jar, a letter no one dares open. Then there is the curious Shepherd's document, supposedly discovered in a private collection near Arles. It is inscribed in a bizarre combination of Latin and Old Occitan, and it speaks of a line of fire passed from the Mount to the Rose. Some interpret this as poetic nonsense, but others, those steeped in Masonic or Rosicrucian traditions, read it profoundly differently. Fire, Mount, and Rose are all potent initiatic symbols, and when arranged visually, the phrase seems to describe a journey from Rennes-le-Château to the Rosslyn Meridian. Yes, that infamous imaginary line cutting through Saint-Sulpice in Paris, often mentioned in Da Vinci Code-inspired theories. But long before Dan Brown, the Rosslyn Meridian was whispered about by mystics and cartographers who believed certain energies flowed along specific longitudinal pathways. Could the bloodline, intricately encoded into this very geography, have been preserved not within cities, but within these subtle lines? Many of the so-called lost manuscripts connected to this theory are not entirely lost. They are simply inaccessible. Private families in the Languedoc region have long been rumored to possess heirlooms passed down since the time of the Cathars. In 1994, a researcher claimed to have seen a fragment of an illuminated gospel that depicted Mary Magdalene seated beside Jesus, her hand gently resting on her belly, swollen with child. The document, of course, disappeared again before any official verification could take place. Naturally, critics argue that every claim of a hidden map or lost scroll ultimately leads nowhere, that for every genuinely discovered parchment, there are a dozen meticulously crafted fakes, that secret societies and esoteric cartography are mere distractions from the profound absence of verifiable evidence. And yet, too many disparate pieces remain that stubbornly refuse to fit comfortably into the orthodox puzzle. Consider the copper-etched diagram allegedly uncovered near Montségur in the 1920s. It depicts the formidable fortress surrounded by 5 stars, forming a precise pentagram, each point corresponding to a local landmark. When plotted on a modern map, the formation remains remarkably intact. Local legend refers to it as the Seal of the Queen. But which queen? The Virgin? Magdalene? Or someone born of both bloodlines? And what of the stone engravings near the Château de Blanchefort, where Saunière was often observed wandering at night? Strange runes, half Celtic, half Latin, scar the hillside, marking places where treasure hunters and mystics alike have dug, mostly in vain. Yet each year, people return, drawn not by the lure of gold, but by an undeniable obsession, because they believe the truth was deliberately hidden there, meticulously encoded into the very land itself. This brings us to a peculiar idea. What if the ultimate proof of the bloodline is not a document at all? What if it is a specific location, a single site, obscured by time and deliberate intent, containing bones, relics, and perhaps a written account that meticulously explains everything? The true Holy Grail, not a cup, but a tomb. No one has yet discovered it, but the clues remain scattered across ancient parchment, enduring stone, and pervasive rumor. And slowly, with each recovered manuscript and every strange line meticulously drawn across a forgotten map, the pattern sharpens, not into a definitive answer, but into a compelling path. Now, drift with me far from sleepy French villages and venerable medieval cathedrals into darker, more treacherous terrain. The air grows noticeably colder. The measured march of boots echoes ominously through alpine passes and dimly lit crypts. The time is the 1930s, and the man at the center of it all is Adolf Hitler. But this is not the conventional narrative of tanks or treaties. This is about a man profoundly obsessed not merely with power, but with myth, with bloodlines, with sacred relics, and with ancient truths twisted into a perverse ideology. It is about the Third Reich's clandestine search for the Holy Grail, and what they fanatically believed it could prove about themselves. Many are aware that Hitler's inner circle possessed a profound fascination with the occult. But few truly comprehend how deeply that fascination burrowed into the very machinery of Nazi research. Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the SS, meticulously modeled the organization after a medieval knightly order. Their motto, "My honor is called loyalty." Their insignia, powerful runes drawn from Norse mythology. But beneath this aesthetic facade lay a sinister goal, to prove a mythic Aryan origin for the Germanic peoples, and that relentless quest led them directly into the shadows of the Merovingians. The SS established an institute known as the Ahnenerbe, loosely translated as ancestral heritage. It commenced as a research body, but its true purpose was far stranger. It funded expeditions across Europe and beyond, relentlessly hunting for artifacts, sacred sites, and documents that could legitimize Nazi racial ideology. Among their most ambitious goals was the precise location of the real Holy Grail, something they believed was more than a mere cup, something that, in their warped view, represented a pristine bloodline, an ancient legacy, a compelling racial claim. Himmler reportedly dispatched teams into the Pyrenees, the Black Forest, and even as far as Tibet. One of their key destinations was Rennes-le-Château. Yes, the very village where Béranger Saunière amassed his inexplicable wealth, where so many believed the bloodline secret was uncovered. The Nazis meticulously scoured the area. They interrogated locals. They excavated ruins. They fanatically believed the Grail had either been hidden there or that crucial clues to its whereabouts had been meticulously encoded in the local architecture and enduring legends. They were not merely searching for gold. They were relentlessly seeking a lineage. You see, the Nazis profoundly believed that the Merovingians were Aryan kings, noble, divinely favored, and unjustly overthrown. Their distinctive long hair, their purported divine origin, and their early conversion to Christianity all marked them, in the Nazi narrative, as spiritually elevated. Himmler speculated that Dagobert II's assassination had been part of a vast conspiracy, not merely to destroy a dynasty, but to systematically bury sacred, racially pure knowledge. In this twisted worldview, the bloodline was not merely holy, it was racially pure, a proto-Aryan blueprint for their abhorrent ideology. The Nazi interest in esoteric Christianity extended to Mary Magdalene as well. Some researchers claim the SS had translated texts that suggested Mary Magdalene fled to France not as a mere refugee, but as a sacred vessel, that she bore children, that the Merovingians were her descendants, and by extension, that the bloodline was both holy and uniquely European. They even delved into Cathar legends, particularly the persistent tale that the last Cathars vigilantly guarded a secret that would one day irrevocably change the world. Some believed that secret was the Grail. Others believed it was a pure lineage. Let us pause and profoundly breathe here, because we are treading in profoundly dangerous territory. These beliefs, appropriated, systematically distorted, and brutally weaponized, were used to justify unthinkable atrocities. The Nazis were not seeking truth. They were relentlessly searching for symbols to sanctify genocide. Their obsession with blood was not about divinity, it was about racial supremacy. That crucial distinction matters profoundly. And yet, within their corrupted hunt, fragments of the original mystery resurface. There is evidence that the Ahnenerbe uncovered manuscripts, possibly coded genealogies, while extensively exploring southern France. These documents reportedly vanished into Nazi archives, many of which were never recovered after the war. Some whisper that these texts contained references to the Child of the Rose and the Covenant of the Bee. Vague phrases, yes, but profoundly familiar ones to anyone tracing Merovingian lore. One of the most bizarre intersections of Nazi interest and bloodline theory involves Wewelsburg Castle. Himmler intended it as the spiritual epicenter of the SS, a sort of Teutonic Camelot. The castle's floor featured a mysterious black sun, a symbol never explicitly explained, but linked to cycles of death and rebirth. Rooms were named after legendary knights, and one chamber, referred to unofficially as the Grail Room, was meticulously designed with perfect acoustic resonance. Rumors suggest that arcane rituals were conducted there, intended to channel or awaken something hidden within the blood. Again, this could all be elaborate theatrical myth layered upon myth. But Wewelsburg was no accident. It was constructed with the meticulous precision of someone attempting to align with something geographically, symbolically, and perhaps even cosmically. After the war, Allied forces confiscated hundreds of documents from Nazi vaults. Many remained classified or lost, and in the ensuing years, reports emerged of strange disappearances, researchers who vanished while investigating Nazi expeditions in France and Germany. A few had been actively pursuing the very same bloodline theory we have meticulously traced since Dagobert VI. Did they uncover something profound, or did they simply get too close to a secret still fiercely protected? It is worth noting that Nazi interest in esoterica did not perish in 1945. Elements of their twisted mythology seeped into post-war occult groups, neo-pagan circles, and pervasive conspiracy culture. The bloodline theory, tragically severed from its sacred roots, was hijacked to serve ideologies diametrically opposed to the fundamental teachings of Jesus. This is not a coincidence. It is a grave warning. The Merovingian Code, if it truly exists, was never intended to exalt one race over another. It was not a tool for domination. It was a lineage of profound interconnection, a link between the human and the divine, the sacred and the earthly. And yet, in the hands of madmen, even the holiest truth can be twisted into a brutal blade. So, we must tread with extreme caution. We pursue this profound mystery, not for power, not for definitive proof, but for profound understanding. Because somewhere beneath the rubble of ancient castles and the ashes of false empires, a story persists, patiently waiting to be reclaimed, not by those who seek to possess it, but by those who seek to truly comprehend it. Now, allow your thoughts to drift across the vast Atlantic. Leave behind the bloodied cathedrals of Europe and the war-ravaged archives of the Old World. Picture a dramatically different landscape. Windswept Scottish cliffs yielding to dense pine forests, and then the expansive, profound stillness of early America. You might assume the story of the Merovingians concludes in Europe, but some compelling narratives suggest it did not end at all. It simply traversed the immense ocean, hidden, meticulously preserved, and quietly reborn. And at the very epicenter of this extraordinary theory stands a single resonant name, Sinclair. The Sinclair family, also known as the St. Clairs of Rosslyn, have long occupied a curious and central position in esoteric legend. Their ancestral seat, Rosslyn Chapel, is a structure steeped in profound mystery. Constructed in the mid-15th century by William Sinclair, it defies easy categorization. It is neither purely Catholic nor comfortably Gothic. Instead, it resonates as a meticulously coded message, sculpted in enduring stone. Examine Rosslyn's intricate architecture more closely, and you will discern symbols from Christianity, Judaism, Norse mythology, and, most curiously, pre-Columbian plants such as maize and aloe. But maize was unequivocally unknown in Europe until after Columbus's voyages. So, how could it appear intricately carved into stone decades earlier? Here is where the narrative becomes truly strange. According to Masonic lore and persistent Sinclair family tradition, members of the Sinclair clan purportedly traveled to the New World nearly a century before Columbus. One name in particular, Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney, is said to have led an expedition in 1398 to what is now Nova Scotia. Some legends even claim he brought with him sacred artifacts, and something more. Was it the Grail? Was it ancient scrolls? Was it sacred blood? While mainstream historians largely dismiss the Sinclair voyage as mere legend, the story stubbornly refuses to die. In Nova Scotia's Oak Island, yes, that Oak Island, individuals have searched for centuries for a mysterious, deeply buried treasure. Tunnels, booby traps, and strange inscriptions point to something immensely old and very deliberately hidden. Some contend it is Templar gold. Others believe it represents Merovingian documentation, irrefutable proof of the bloodline, meticulously carried across the sea and concealed under layers of profound secrecy and soil. And then there is the Westford Knight. This obscure monument in Massachusetts is a faint carving on a granite slab. Believers claim it depicts a medieval knight bearing a sword and shield. Nearby is a marking said to be the Sinclair family crest. Skeptics argue it is merely a glacial scratch or a modern fabrication, but still, it persistently lingers. Like all the other clues, the connection deepens when one examines the profound relationship between the Sinclairs and the Knights Templar. The family were renowned protectors of the Templars during their intense persecution, and Rosslyn Chapel, often described as a stone cipher, contains dozens of Templar symbols, including the distinctive double-headed eagle and the iconic Red Cross. Could the Sinclairs have inherited not merely Templar wealth, but profound knowledge, a legacy meticulously handed off as the Templars disbanded under papal decree? One theory suggests that the Priory of Sion utilized families like the Sinclairs as custodians, assigning them guardianship over the bloodline's material history, while the actual descendants receded into anonymity. There is also the enduring legend of the vault beneath Rosslyn Chapel, a sealed chamber rumored to contain scrolls, genealogies, and relics purportedly from Solomon's temple. Despite ground-penetrating radar suggesting the existence of a chamber beneath the chapel, no excavation has ever been officially permitted. The reasons cited are both practical and profoundly suspicious. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, certain American founding families exhibit curious heraldic symbols: bees, fleur-de-lis, solar crosses. In colonial-era architecture and old Masonic lodges, one will find Rosslyn-esque iconography. Columns that seem out of place, geometry that does not align with conventional blueprints. And in Washington, D.C., a city famously laid out by Freemasons, those very symbols repeat: pentagrams, owls, and, subtly hidden in the angles, remnants of a geometry older than the Constitution itself. George Washington himself was a prominent Freemason. His inauguration took place not in a cathedral, but within a Masonic lodge. His compass and square signet ring, meticulously preserved in museums, speaks volumes to those fluent in symbols. Could the ideals of American liberty, so often hailed as a definitive break from monarchy, also subtly conceal the survival of a different kind of royalty? Herein lies one of the more curious ironies. The New World, founded on revolution and democracy, may have ironically become the clandestine refuge of a bloodline older than the crowns it explicitly rejected, not to rule, but to enduringly persist. Modern genealogists have speculated that certain East Coast families, names you have encountered in the hallowed halls of Harvard and Yale, may trace distant lineage back to the Merovingians through colonial marriages and European descent. It is not an audacious claim, genealogically speaking. By sheer numbers, millions of Europeans today are statistically likely to descend from Charlemagne. But only a small subset pursued the esoteric threads, the whispered ones, the ones that assert Charlemagne was not the beginning, but merely a veil. Again, we are left with potent symbols: a 5-petaled rose above a courthouse doorway, a twin serpent motif above a library arch. Nothing overtly explicit, but nothing purely random either. One researcher claims to have discovered a family Bible in Virginia, passed down since the 1700s, that includes a handwritten notation in Latin, ex sanguine regale, of the royal blood. No context, no explanation, just a quiet, profound assertion hidden in the margins of Psalms. As with everything in this sprawling narrative, the deeper one delves, the more the lines blur. What commenced in Merovingian Gaul and bled through Templar tunnels and Masonic rituals may have crossed an entire ocean, not as mere legend, but as an enduring legacy. Now, ask yourself, if the bloodline had to flee, if the world grew too perilous for its truth, where would it go? To the land of liberty? To a chapel meticulously carved in stone? Or to a quiet farmhouse in Massachusetts, where a granite slab patiently waits amidst the weeds? Perhaps all three, perhaps none, but the clues undeniably exist, carved, etched, and coded, if you possess the willingness to follow them across the vast sea. Close your eyes. Now, envision a dimly lit cathedral, not constructed of stone, but of pure data. Vast halls of hard drives hum with a quiet, urgent energy. Shelves of ancient texts meticulously rendered into binary code. Dustless vaults that do not breathe, but profoundly remember. We have arrived in the present, but not quite the now you recognize. This is the new frontier of the ancient mystery, the relentless search for the Merovingian bloodline in the digital age. For centuries, researchers were constrained by formidable geography and rigid gatekeeping. Access to rare manuscripts demanded political influence, papal blessing, or centuries of inherited privilege. But today, millions of documents, papal bulls, church records, noble genealogies, even once forbidden esoteric manuscripts, once locked behind Vatican doors, are being meticulously digitized. And somewhere within that surging tidal wave of metadata, keyword strings, and cross-linked annotations may lie the very code that breaks the centuries of silence. Artificial intelligence is already actively assisting genealogists in forging connections that human researchers would undoubtedly have missed. It does not tire. It does not grow bored. It does not dismiss what appears to be mere coincidence. It meticulously identifies patterns, names recurring across vast centuries, marriages that bridge forgotten dynasties, dates that precisely align with eclipses, ancient rituals, and whispered births. The algorithms possess no concern for orthodoxy. They hold no interest in preserving established narratives. They simply match data. And lately, they have been uncovering remarkable things. Consider, for instance, a project launched quietly by an independent researcher in 2021. Utilizing natural language processing on thousands of scanned ecclesiastical documents from the 13th and 14th centuries, they trained an AI to identify references to non-canonical figures, individuals mentioned in church records who appeared intrinsically tied to religious centers but held no official titles. One name emerged repeatedly across France, Spain, and southern England: Magdalene de Sangre, always female, always appearing in close proximity to royal baptisms, noble weddings, and sudden, significant deaths. The name itself is profoundly suspicious. Magdalene, clearly invoking Mary Magdalene, and Sangre, a potent fusion of blood and sacred. Some speculate it was a priest's clandestine code. Others believe it was the pseudonym of a living custodian of the line. In either case, the pattern was unequivocally clear. She appeared precisely where the legacy required protection. That researcher is no longer active online. There has also been a renewed digital excavation of the dossier secrets, the infamous Priory of Sion documents. Most had been written off as outright fabrications. But by applying stylometric analysis, essentially a digital fingerprint of writing styles, some peculiar inconsistencies emerged. While several documents were clearly penned by Pierre Plantard and Philippe de Cherizet in the mid-20th century, at least one section displayed a writing pattern that matched no known modern author. Its syntax, rhythm, and archaic phrasing aligned more closely with late Renaissance Latinists. A fragment, possibly predating its alleged forgers. That fragment, intriguingly, mentions the anointed blood in exile. The term had not appeared in any mainstream literature before 1956, but it is now being echoed in newer documents and in encrypted messages discovered on esoteric forums. Then there is the explosion of online communities diligently attempting to crowdsource this hunt. Reddit boards filled with painstakingly translated Templar logs. Discord servers that meticulously analyze the frescoes of Rosslyn Chapel pixel by pixel. Even TikTok accounts that meticulously track the precise position of ancient stars over European cathedrals to identify ley lines. And amidst the pervasive nonsense and the digital noise, something moves. A rhythm. A story. One might scoff, but history has consistently concealed its profound truths in plain sight, patiently awaiting the right eyes to one day perceive them. And the Vatican, too, has entered the digital age. Their apostolic archive, once the most secretive in the world, has cautiously begun to release select scans to the public. But for every scroll made available for perusal, hundreds more remain hermetically sealed. AI programs have already flagged anomalous indexing patterns. Rooms deliberately mislabeled, collections temporarily inaccessible, and keywords meticulously scrubbed from databases without discernible explanation. A few particularly controversial collections, those from the early Carolingian period, are conspicuously marked under review indefinitely. It is almost as if someone else is vigilantly watching the watchers. The profound question then arises. If you possess the capability to train a machine to find the Merovingian line, would you? Or, more provocatively, has someone already accomplished this feat? It would only require one powerful foundation, one group with the motive, the immense funding, and the sophisticated algorithm. Not necessarily to reveal the truth, but to hold it quietly, strategically. Because in this age of digital transparency, profound secrecy demands a new form of silence, invisibility in plain sight, a code inscribed not in ink, but in deliberate absence. There is a growing theory that the true custodians of the bloodline, if they still exist, are no longer burying scrolls in tombs or carving messages into stone. They are meticulously embedding them in metadata, hash signatures, zero-width spaces, steganographic noise within digital images. A photo of a rose may contain an encrypted name. A cathedral's virtual tour may hold time-stamped echoes of a grail-shaped geotag. You would remain oblivious unless you possess the precise knowledge of how to look. This brings us full circle back to the very idea of the Grail, not as a cup, not as a scroll, but as a subtle signal. A signal transmitted across vast time, encrypted into flesh and language, and now, perhaps, into silicon. You may dismiss it as conspiracy, as folklore, or as metadata madness. But here we are, 22 chapters deep, and the intricate picture no longer merely resembles a theory. It has coalesced into a profound network, a complex lattice of overlapping truths, systematically buried by power and painstakingly unearthed by code. The bloodline may no longer require temples or valiant knights. It may only require a password and someone with the courage and knowledge to type it in. Take a profound breath. Allow all these fragments to gently coalesce in your mind. The long-haired kings, the enigmatic bees, the names whispered in stone, the maps drawn in starlight, the chapel carvings, the hidden archives, the monks, the masons, the Nazis, and the intricate algorithms. It is time now to step back and re-examine, not as a hardened skeptic, nor as an uncritical believer, but simply as an individual diligently following a persistent thread. Because after centuries of intense speculation, profound silence, and calculated subterfuge, the story of the Merovingian bloodline has not dissolved into mere myth. It has survived, quietly, impossibly, and deliberately. So, what do we genuinely know? The Merovingians governed parts of Europe from the 5th to the 8th centuries. Their reign was characterized by distinct oddities, a divine right conferred not by coronation, but by their very blood. Their hair, never cut, was believed to house spiritual power. They were Christian, yet uncomfortably close to earlier pagan rituals. And then, with startling abruptness, they were overthrown. Not through overt warfare, but with a subtle whisper. The Carolingians replaced them with papal blessing, and history was meticulously rewritten almost overnight. Why? Well, perhaps that bloodline carried something the Church could not possibly control. Not heresy in the conventional sense, but profound heritage. A living legacy that powerfully asserted holiness did not reside solely in priests, bishops, or Rome, but fundamentally in people, in blood, in the womb, in woman. Think back to Mary Magdalene, deliberately recast by early church fathers as a reformed sinner, systematically scrubbed of her potential role as a spiritual partner and progenitor. And consider once more Dagobert II, brutally murdered in the forest after years in exile, perhaps precisely because he threatened to reclaim not merely a throne, but a profound truth. Layered atop this are the Priory of Sion, the Knights Templar, the Vatican's conspicuously missing records, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the Sinclairs, and the digital breadcrumbs. Over and over, different players emerge, but the central theme remains constant: to protect a sacred secret, or to ruthlessly suppress it. We cannot state with absolute certainty that the Merovingians descended from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. No one alive today can definitively prove it. But here is what we can affirm. Someone believed it profoundly enough to hide it, enough to kill for it, enough to preserve it in art, symbol, architecture, and crucially in blood for over 300 years. And if the story was genuinely nonsense, why has it never truly vanished? If the lineage was an outright lie, why expend centuries crafting intricate layers of protection, diversion, and sophisticated disinformation? Why embed crucial clues in cathedrals, bury maps beneath tombs, smuggle names into genealogies, and commission paintings that depict Magdalene not as a mere disciple, but as a venerable mother? Perhaps the profound truth has always resided in the shadows, because it fundamentally threatens the very structures that have defined our civilization. A divine bloodline, born not from ethereal magic, but from human union, one that boldly asserts the sacred and the human were never meant to be separate, that kings can bleed and God can love. And in that powerful idea, if you truly listen, you might discern the echo of something profoundly revolutionary. A church built on Peter, but haunted by Mary. A world ostensibly ruled by emperors, yet subtly shaped by profound secrets. And all of it pointing to a name nearly lost to the mists of time. Dagobert, the forgotten king, the exiled blood. The delicate thread that, once pulled, unravels the entire fabric of divine right and replaces it with something far deeper, not supremacy, but inheritance. So, where does this bloodline reside now? Within a Scottish vault? Within the ancient walls of the Vatican? In a dusty library in Spain? Or perhaps walking anonymously down a bustling, crowded street, unknown even to itself? Maybe it is not about definitively finding the final heir. Maybe it never was. Maybe it is about profoundly remembering that such a legacy was even possible, and that power, when deliberately hidden, always leaves a trail, a fleur-de-lis carved too deeply, a name passed down quietly, a ritual that does not quite belong, a child born to carry something more profound than mere memory, a bloodline existing in the shadows. So, here you are, drifting at the very edge of the mystery, where the insistent voices have quieted and the echoes grow faint. You have followed the intricate thread from ancient tombs to hallowed temples, from grand cathedrals to formidable castles, from potent symbols to the cold logic of silicon. And now, the profound question that lingers like incense in a forgotten chapel. Was it all an elaborate lie, or the most meticulously hidden truth in human history? Close your eyes for a moment. Picture an immense library, vast and silent. Somewhere in its deepest, most secluded corridor lies a single, unassuming scroll. No title, no author, just a resonant name and an intricate bloodline. Perhaps it recounts tales of kings who ruled by right of birth, stemming not from conventional nobility, but from inherent divinity. Or perhaps it is merely a story, embellished, romanticized, intricately woven into legend, to soothe humanity's persistent, aching need for connection to something greater than itself. History is not merely a collection of facts, it is memory. And memory lies easily, but forgets reluctantly. There exists no definitive document that proves beyond all doubt that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a child. There is no DNA record that unequivocally places a Merovingian king within the precise genealogy of Christ. And yet, what if that is precisely the point? Maybe truth was never intended to be definitively proved, only to be meticulously preserved. And maybe, just maybe, you are an integral part of it. Not through blood, but through profound curiosity, in the simple yet powerful act of remembering, of reaching, of reconstructing. The Church possesses its reasons. The Templars took their solemn vows. The Freemasons crafted their intricate riddles. But you, here and now, possess your profound wonder. And wonder is, arguably, the most dangerous thing of all, because it stubbornly refuses to be satisfied. Whether this extraordinary story is fact or fiction, whether the bloodline still flows or has long since evaporated, does not truly matter now, does it? What truly matters is that the symbols endure, the whispers persistently continue. The light in the stained glass still flickers across Magdalene's face, and the truth, or the profound possibility of it, is still out there, patiently waiting to be discovered. So, the next time you walk past an ancient cathedral, or gaze intently into a painting, or experience that strange, undeniable sense that something ancient is observing you, perhaps you will remember. Perhaps you will look a little more closely. Perhaps you will hear the code, pulsing just beneath the profound silence. And in that silence, the line remains, waiting.